last night about, gosh, I don't know, 7:30, something like that, I got a message from Eddie Garrison. And I found it interesting. Eddie sent me a message that said, and I said, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm at the grocery store. And he said, can you check, because the grocery stores are all wiped out, right? Because of Death Storm, Snowmageddon 2025.
Hope you weren't looking for bread, Jake.
So, exactly, right?
Or toilet paper.
And
no eggs or milk for you.
I walked up and down those aisles, and literally it was like, just, stuff blowing down and tumbleweeds, blowing around. But Eddie said, can you do me a favor and get 14 boxes of aluminum foil? 14 boxes of aluminum foil. And I thought, they've got, at the Garrison household, they must have had, a bunch of cooking left over from Thanksgiving or something. And I said, sure. And I then asked why he needs 14. And he said, well, we've got the ultimate tinfoil hat conspiracy, and so I need that much just to make my own, right? Because he has a 9 7/8 head.
Right. I'm proud of Eddie for having had that calculation done and not making you guesstimate how much you
Clearly,
needed.
he's bought one before.
Sure.
So then I wondered what it was. What could it be that would lead Eddie Garrison to thinking that perhaps we need tinfoil hats? What possibly could it be that would lead us to sit here and have conspiracy theories galore? And I thought, maybe I should check my emails. So I did. Sure enough, the following email came into my inbox last night, just shortly before Eddie Garrison had requested the aluminum foil. Revised, this from the Indianapolis Colts. Colts media schedule availability, and then in parentheses, no availability on January 8th. Capital letters. Postponed to a later date, Chris Ballard availability. And I thought, oh my goodness, what do you know? And then Kevin Bowen ruined all the fun and let us know. In fact, Chris Ballard simply under the weather. So there is no press conference of Chris Ballard this morning for us to discuss in terms of the state of the Colts. And yes, for Colts fans that are curious, by all account, and I obviously am being very sarcastic here, a lot of people are ill right now, certainly with Chris Ballard, understandable, and hope he's feeling better soon, and they will revise and redo a time of press conference. But that is the case, it appears, is that, and totally understandable. I mean, everybody I know in the last 3 weeks has had some sort of being under the weather, and I would imagine with the grind of the NFL season, that can take its toll. So it will be at another time, and I would assume within probably a week or so that we will, in fact, hear from Chris Ballard and get more of an idea of just where things stand. Now, Jim Irsay, and I did not realize this. I did not realize that Jim Irsay, that the Colts had posted on their website, as he does after I think just about every game, that Jim Irsay had addressed the team after their loss, after their win against Jacksonville.
Kind of felt like a loss when you're going to overtime to end the year with a year like that. But hey, they did win.
But essentially, I mean, we could play you the audio, I guess, but basically what Jim Irsay just simply said was, look, we are committed to winning. We are very proud of what you guys did. I guess you kind of have to say those things, Jimmy, right? Am I wrong there in saying that?
I mean, I don't see any point as the owner if you're going to have a release either later in the day or before that. I can't remember the exact timeline, talking about how excited you are for 2025 and go in there and ream everybody. So I guess that's your job, is to put on a brave face and be like, hey guys, way to get 8 wins. Way to go.
Especially with cameras around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably true, right? So, basically what he said was, look, we're proud of the fact that you guys got to this point. We are committed to winning. We are frustrating, but proud of the fact you finished strong.
It would be funny if he then said, okay, turn off the camera, and said, this is a disgrace. What are we doing here?
Right. Well,
8 wins?
That's right.
On that schedule?
This isn't at all what I expected. And if you guys think it was hard this year, wait till you see the schedule for next year, right?
Yeah.
But that's where we stand right now on this Wednesday of Snowmageddon. The Aussies arriving in an hour. What a welcome, right? Hey, going to be 5 degrees tomorrow. Welcome to Indianapolis for my Australian friends.
Silly question, admittedly, for the Australians, because I know they travel America pretty frequently. and we've also had it melt a bit since then. But will this be up there with the most snow they've seen upon landing?
You know what? The first time, that's not a dumb question. I can't imagine how many times in their life they've even seen snow, but the first time that I met Michael and Marcus at the game where I then took them to the Speedway and toured them around when I met them, there was a ton of snow on the ground then. I don't know if it was this amount, but I mean, there was we had just had like a polar vortex. Same thing, a Snowmageddon 2021 or whatever year that was. Good afternoon to you on a Wednesday, though. My name is Jake Query. That is the voice of Jimmy Cook. You just heard Eddie Garrison, who just took off his tinfoil hat. It only weighs 9 pounds, so he's happy to have that down there.
Took him the whole segment to take it off, believe it or not.
That's right. A couple of crowbars were involved. But this is Query and Company on a day that we will talk again about the Colts a lot, and then the Pacers in action tonight, taking on the Chicago Bulls. Pat Boylan going to join us on the program. So, too, Jeff Rabjohns, his first appearance of 2025, as we will talk a little Indiana basketball. But let's begin with the Colts conversation. Chris Ballard is not, giving us the talking points that we were expecting this morning and this afternoon to have because the press conference has been postponed. But Zaire Franklin kind of did. I thought it was kind of vague, to be honest with you. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, allow me to illuminate you.
What are you talking about, Jake?
Thank you, Eddie.
You're welcome.
Zaire Franklin, of course, linebacker for the Colts, who is on his way to the Pro Bowl, has had an up-and-down season away from the field. Now, I think he's a good guy. He's involved in charitable things. He is a guy that you can see around town. He's a good dude, but at times there is no question about the fact that he showed some immaturity in terms of reading the room. Everybody knows that guy that just has it, like, you might even like him in your group of friends, but you're like, can somebody tell Dave to read the room? What do you mean? Well, we're all sitting around and we're talking about the fact that, Alan just found out that his wife is really sick, and Dave interjected to tell us that he's PO'd because he's got to fix the air conditioner. Like, read the room, dude. Time and place, right? And in the case of Zaire
Jimmy,
Franklin,
come on.
That's right. When the team itself is struggling, when the fan base is upset, and you are doing two things, one of which you're getting into kind of a battle and a war of words with a popular former player that is obviously ubiquitous amongst the sports culture of the United States and McAfee. And in addition to that, not only are you like barking back of critique about you, but towards the home stretch as the season is spiraling away from the franchise, and the big story and talking point is whether or not they can even get into the postseason. During all of that, Zaire Franklin, a lot of his social media and a lot of the conversation that he was generating was about his desire or effort or campaign to get himself to the Pro Bowl. I understand it in this regard. I was at dinner on Sunday night with Mo from Ohio and his son Caleb, and Stephen Holder was with us. And Caleb asked the question to Stephen and myself, what's been your most fulfilling moment of your career? An interesting question that I don't know that I've ever been asked, right?
Getting to work with Jake every day, easily. Hands down. You don't think about it.
And
Eddie, too.
Wait a second. Hold on now.
Yeah, both of you guys share the same answer, I realize.
Right,
but
yeah.
But I told Caleb, I said, you know what? And there's a reason why I'm going with this in relation to Zaire Franklin. I said, for me, I think the most fulfilling thing was when I was a junior in high school. When I was a young kid, I was the youngest of three. My sister was well older than I at North Central, and she was there during North Central's great era of football with Lars Tate and Gary Thurman and great players, right? And so I was like in the 5th grade, and when you're a kid, the local high school players are NFL stars in your mind, right?
Shout out Paul Casaro.
And I would listen to those North Central games of my sister on the radio, on the student radio station. And I really had this fascination and this dream of someday being able to do that. And you have to be a senior. It's a 2-year program of radio television at North Central. My junior year, they did not have any seniors to do it, and so they opened it up for an open tryout. and myself, Matt Gingle, Adam Alexander, there were a bunch of us that tried out for it. And I was in the cafeteria when somebody came up to me the first week of school and said, "Did you hear?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "You got picked. You're doing the game on the radio." That was the most fulfilling moment of my career to this day, odd as it sounds, because in terms of being able to, in the moment, talk about what it meant to me, there's nothing I've done since then that meant more to me in terms of relativity than that moment did to me right then. And the reason being, when I was a young kid, that's what I had dreamed about. So to be able to see that I was doing something that I'd thought about when I was in 4th or 5th grade, 5 or 6 years before, granted, but meant a lot to me. So I understand in the case of Zaire Franklin, when you are a professional football player and you have team goals and you want to get to the postseason, you want to get to the Super Bowl, you want to win a division, you want to win games. But I do understand that Zaire Franklin probably, as a young boy, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, when he first started playing football, probably dreamed of or remembers the first time that he saw the Pro Bowl or saw what that meant and made a personal goal for himself. So to know that that was within reach for him, I do understand him saying, this is really important to me because I want to be able to go back and tell that little kid that his dream became a reality. I get it. But read the room and time and place. And in this situation, when your team is spiraling, when you have fallen well short of expectation, when you are a roster and a franchise and a fan base that anticipated being able to go into the postseason and contend for your division, and you weren't really, and I know that mathematically, statistically, and numerically they were within sight of it. They weren't, right? The only thing they had to do was hold their own serve first against really bad teams, and they go and lose, right? So during that time, Franklin is campaigning for himself, and then at the end of the year when literally there are 25,000, 30,000 people there, and one of the biggest areas of void for seats is McAfee Suite, and Franklin goes around and does the mockery of shaking hands of everybody of fans that weren't there. Read the room. So he sends the following on social media. This was sent yesterday afternoon, about an hour after we were off the air. Indy fans, listen, I made some mistakes. I let some things get to me that they shouldn't and did some things that I wish I could take back. But understand my heart was always right, and I'm going to learn and be better because of it. #ForTheShoe. Now, that's kind of vague. I'm assuming that he's apologizing for simply not reading the room, for, as a captain, appearing to prioritize personal accolade over team vision. I assume that's what that is. But either way, what does it say about your franchise? What does it say about your season that the most noteworthy thing to come within the week of the season ending, midweek, are A, people wondering why your general manager is not holding the press conference he was supposed to hold. And again, he's ill. I get it. I mean, that's not a huge thing. But B, one of your captains is having to immediately go to social media to make an apology. And because it's fairly vague, there are multiple areas with which you could determine he's actually apologizing for. Those things are simply, none of them are massive. None of them are overly egregious. None of them are disgusting. But all of them, when put together, I think are a microcosm of showing the total lack right now of direction and professionalism that is plaguing the Indianapolis Colts.
And it also doesn't come off as genuine to me. Like, let's say he's talking about the pantomiming the handshake at the McAfee Suite. That was just 2 days ago. Like, you're telling me in 48 hours, suddenly you've, seen the light and realized that probably isn't a good idea to continue to fan the flames of something you're better off letting die down. The Pro Bowl thing is interesting. I don't know the intricacies of his contract, and there's a better way you could have gone about doing this if this is the case, but a lot of these contracts are set up with stipulations for incentives and extra money, and some of those are tied to the Pro Bowl. If that's not the case, and I'm not saying that Zaire Franklin is on a trajectory to be a Hall of Fame player, but for a long time, Jake, that was how you measured Hall of Fame resumes, was how many Pro Bowls you made, how many All-Pros you made, and, of course, the rest of your stats and where you shined throughout the game. So I get, to an extent, advocating for that type of recognition, but have somebody else do it for you. If you have it coming from your own personal account during losing streaks, it's an awful look because it makes you look, and maybe he is, I don't know Zaire Franklin, but it makes you look like, to your point, Jake, you were putting me before team. If you want to still advocate for Pro Bowl aspirations because it's in your contract or because you care about legacy in that regard, have a Team Zaire Franklin account created or do it on the podcast or whatever. But to do it on your own personal account in the midst of the struggles of the season, it's a bad look. And when you have the vague apology on Twitter, you're right. What are you attacking? Is this a blanket statement where I'm just supposed to give full and total forgiveness for you 3 days after the season's over because something's changed? It's weird. I get wanting to get ahead of things maybe or spin things back into a public light, but this quick after the season's done, when at large point, it's not about Franklin. Colts fans, I think, are probably frustrated with him, but that's not the core of the issue. You're kind of making it about you again when it's not about you. It's about the fact they're returning once again with this trio of Richardson, Steichen, and Ballard, and you just happen to have misstepped along the way.
You know, the old adage, there's no I in team, right?
I'm a savage.
Somebody woke up Eddie. What happened?
Oh, sorry.
Eddie thought we're just now eating breakfast.
Sorry.
What in the world?
Was that the Winter Soldier? We just activated you on a code word?
Sorry.
This reminds me, hold on. Speaking of Read the Room, when we were in college, do you guys know the song, I Got the Power? Remember that song? I got the power.
Yeah.
We were in college. That song had come on the radio, whatever. We're at some party. Hour later, we're all just sitting around, right? Everybody's just sitting around like there's a game on, whatever. All of a sudden, one of the guys that I lived with jumps up out of nowhere. He's probably like 9 Keystone Lights into it. Jumps up and just says, I'm the lyrical Jesse James. And everybody's like, what in the world just happened?
It's on a delay.
It was very on a delay there. But, yeah, that is a Zaire Franklin quote, right?
Yeah, he said that during the Giants game, you're losing to the Giants and make a tackle and I'm a savage. Yeah.
I've never seen this kind of energy out of Eddie. Eddie, I've never seen you this. Did you have extra chai tea this morning? What's going on?
I did not.
Do they do shots of espresso and chai tea? I don't know how the makeup works. So
I don't know what happened
All
there.
natural, baby.
Yeah, that was something there. But there's no I in team, right?
Yeah.
But there are an M and an E. There's a me in team. And this particular roster, I don't think the Colts are bad guys. I don't think that, when you talk about how there's a culture problem, look, there's
not a Jimmy Butler throwing stones around
there have
right
been
now
NFL franchises
56.
that have just flat out bad people on it, right? I don't think this roster has bad people, but where it has erred in its construction is I don't know that it has true veteran leadership. When you give, and this is not to take Anthony Richardson and put him right at the bottom of the red line, okay? That's code for throwing under the bus, Indianapolis terms. But it's very difficult to have, I saw an interview the other day, as I referenced before, with Peyton Manning. And I don't even know when the interview was done, but it was retirement level. I mean, it wasn't an interview from 25 years ago. It was a fairly recent interview. And he was talking about leadership. And he said, for me as a quarterback, I came in, and Peyton Manning is a guy that when he announced he was returning for his last year at Tennessee, it was a press conference with a packed room, and the entire state, including media members, erupted and were high-fiving and handshaking each other. This is a guy that, as I'd mentioned, was on the cover of Esquire magazine before he ever even got to the NFL. Everybody knew who Peyton Manning was when he was 21, 22 years old. Everyone knew he was going to be a franchise quarterback. And yet when he came here, he talks about as a leader, he had to earn leadership. And he had to earn it by simply not telling guys I'm the leader, not putting a C on his chest, but rather by letting guys that had been here already when he arrived say to themselves, gosh, I used to get to the facility at 6:30 in an empty parking lot to start working out before practice, and now there's one Bill Estes Chevy Tahoe in the parking lot when I get there at 6. So the next day I got it here at 5:45, and it had been here since 5:30. Manning was always, because he was not always, but he set the tone of it was very difficult for any player to arrive to the facility without seeing his car there first, and it was very difficult for any player to leave the facility without driving past his car in the parking lot on the way home. And Manning knew that he had to do those things, not just to be the best player that he could be, but also to set the tone amongst his locker room that this is what leadership is. And yes, he could cut up like the rest of them, but they knew that there's a reason he was called the sheriff, right? They knew who the leader was. But he didn't come out and vociferously say that. He did it by example. And I know that's a cliche, but he did. And I think they've had that here. I think Andrew Luck did that. And for that matter, I think Matt Hasselbeck did that when Luck was hurt. He was a good leader. Anthony Richardson, at no fault of Anthony Richardson per se, but Anthony Richardson, some guys just don't have the outspoken personality of it, the energy of it. I think I told you, and I know I keep referencing, when I watched this documentary of Anthony Richardson as a high schooler, there are several times where they have him speak to the team, and he's almost uncomfortable with it. It's not his fault. It's actually kind of endearing. But you could tell he was just kind of shy. When you take a guy that has fewer than an entire NFL season's worth of starts in his entire college career, and then is injured as a rookie, has to watch the vast majority of the season, and then you just basically hand him the keys, put a captain thing on his jersey, and say, you're a leader now, I think it sets a bad example for the rest of the roster, in particular when it's a roster that, sparing DeForest Buckner, is made up of players that have never tasted success or seen it in the NFL. They haven't been in the playoffs. They haven't contended for championships. They haven't gone deep into going on the road and representing themselves. I always felt like as an athlete, the best thing for teams sometimes were road trips, because that's where you truly, I always loved away games because I loved getting off the bus. I loved walking into the opposing gym and having people see those of us, like getting off the bus and walking in and knowing, like, these are my guys. This is my team. These are the guys that I'm running with. I always loved that aspect more so even than like at home. I just thought it was fun that way. And I think that when you go on the road in tough environments, in big games, that's oftentimes where teams can bond together. And yet this particular group on the road, in a big game, in a big market, in the cold, season on the line, needing a win, they went out and completely wet themselves in New York. And I think part of that just goes back to guys all looking around, trying to read the room, and some guys just don't even know how to read the room, and others, when they read it, are looking around, and they're like, everybody else is trying to do the same thing I am, and that's figure out who in the hell we are. And they never figured it out. They just never did.
And I don't know what's worse, the struggles against the bad teams, because that's a real mark of who you're close to. We've said all year that it felt like this team was closer to the bottom of the conference and the bottom of the NFC by comparison than they were the upper echelon of the NFL or even middle of the pack teams hunting for the 7 seed, but they weren't able to do it against top-tier competition either. Like, maybe you'd be close for a quarter or so, or maybe if you go back and look at the box score and say, hey, they only lost to the Bills by 10, that's not bad. They weren't close to them either. They were just as close to being a 5-12 team as they were the pipe dream they think they are of being close to the 7 seed or the South. And we can talk about all we want, how close they may or may not be to the Texans. Sure, C.J. Stroud took somewhat of a step back this year. They dealt with a ton of injuries as well, especially that wide receiving core. Everybody gets healthy a year from now, another year underneath D'Amico Ryans, and them being able to further address their issues with that roster. The betting money is going to say that Houston's going to run away with that division next year. If this fails, you're not only a step behind your rebuild as a franchise, you're another year behind catching Houston in a division you used to run circles around.
When we come back, is it possible Zaire Franklin was actually answering to something even more internally than simply alumni or media talking about him? And Jim Irsay did speak to the team. We'll let you hear a little bit of what he had to say as well. And James Boyd joining us 1 o'clock on this Wednesday, midday, hump day edition, Query and Company on the Fan. Somebody can text me their answer if they know the answer to this trivia question at 523-9288.
That's a 317 area code, right,
It
Jake?
is 317-523-9288. For that matter, I every once in a while just like it when people text, so I know people are listening to the show. But
That way you have friends.
well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
How come when Eddie and I call, you don't answer?
Go figure.
Well, he answered my call.
Yeah, you're right. He did. I just didn't want to single myself out.
Now, if you listen to that song, play that song again real quick, Eddie. This song appears very faintly in the background in a scene in the movie Halloween, the original Halloween, with Jamie Lee Curtis. Every time I hear it, I think of it. What scene of the movie is it where you hear that song in the background?
Just rewatched it on Halloween.
It's a great movie, man.
Yeah.
It's a great movie. Low-budget film, but a great one. Okay, Zaire Franklin in his apology. Is it possible when we hear that apology, we think to ourselves, okay, he's probably apologizing for his antics at the end of the game of sarcastically shaking hands of fans that weren't there. Perhaps he is apologizing for getting into a beef with a popular alumni/media member. Maybe it's apologizing for simply campaigning about the Pro Bowl and not reading the room. What would lead to the necessity for those things? Certainly it's not this radio show. Certainly it's not people just on social media clapping back. Could it be the comments that we played the other day, Eddie, I don't know if we still have them, from DeForest Buckner? When DeForest Buckner was talking about some of the areas of issue within the locker room of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, keep in mind, DeForest Buckner is a guy that, with the San Francisco 49ers, went to a Super Bowl. And as I talked about, when you look at Zaire Franklin, E.J. Speed, Grover Stewart, Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman Jr., not saying any of them are bad people, but they haven't gone through the process of getting right there within grasp to the ultimate level and the sacrifice that goes with it. DeForest Buckner, when talking about the issues with the Colts locker room the other day, had this to say.
Ego. I feel like ego. There's times where ego gets in the way. And I feel like, especially in our business, playing in the NFL at a high level and as a team, everybody needs to check their ego at the door when they come in. You know what I'm saying? We all have them. You know what I'm saying? Especially as men. In that locker room, we all have egos, but the great teams, those guys, they sacrifice that ego and check it at the door.
Okay, now, even with that, an ego being an issue, and perhaps that's what Zaire Franklin was apologizing for. It's not to say that there was not positivity about the Colts, and I understand this. But it was on Colts.com, actually. And John Herrick, our colleague over at WIBC, is the one that came in and said, hey, I don't know if you guys noticed, but they have the Irsay speech to the team after the game. This is Jim Irsay, and then we'll react to it afterwards. This is Jim Irsay addressing the Colts after their season finale and their overtime win against the Jacksonville Jaguars heading into the offseason.
Obviously, we're disappointed, but we are 1-0 in 2025, and we have a lot of work to do. But we're still proud of the effort you guys put forward. Let's find a way back to our greatness. You know, that's what my goal is, and I, you know, as you guys are the same as me, we're committed, you know, to winning. And so far, you know, I know this year's been a disappointment, but I'm proud of you guys that you fought back and won in overtime to get us to 8-9. Very proud. I wish, you know, we could have a couple different plays. Could have been a different year. But we will work hard, and we certainly appreciate you guys.
Okay, here's the thing. The couple of plays you'd like to have back. I don't know, dropping the ball, literally, in Denver. Jim Irsay has to say those things. I get it, especially publicly. But the only problem with that, if you're going to nitpick it, is when you say you're committed to winning. Be it fair or not, fortunately or unfortunately, I think that harkens a lot of people back to the video when he used to do the videos after each game of him saying at the end of, I believe it was the 22 season, that anybody who was not all chips in was not going to be around. And that they were, and at that time you could tell that was an angry Jim Irsay, quite frankly, a disappointed Jim Irsay. This one, if you look at the difference just in tone, almost feels like a more complacent Jim Irsay, or I'm not going to say an accepted, like he's accepted where they are, but that is a different video than what you would post to your fans, I realize, because you're addressing the team in general, but the team website posting it, I think there are fans that will see that as them being complacent. I don't think that's the case, and I think that Jim Irsay truly does feel that they are committed to winning. But feeling that you're committed to winning and stating that you're committed to winning and then acting out that you're committed to winning, I think are two different things, and they've got to figure out how to do the latter.
I wish they'd lost to Jacksonville. How does that video change if they lose in overtime to the Jaguars? And now instead of this 8-9 happy-go-lucky vibe of, hey, you ended the season with a win, great job, we're close, made a couple mistakes, but that's okay, we'll get them next year. How does that change if you're 7-10 and you've lost to Jacksonville yet again? Is it still fake optimism like an owner's supposed to do in that scenario where you have the cameras on and you're like, hey, it's okay.
Right.
7 wins is a good amount of wins. Look at the Giants who you lost to. They got less wins than you did. Is it really just the semantics of, hey, finished on a positive, rah, that's your job as the owner? Because I agree with you, Jake. Like, I think Jim Irsay genuinely does believe in this team and genuinely does want to see the best out of them. I just think he's wildly wrong about where the best pathway to achieve that goal is, which is running it back again with the same executive powers that have been in charge the last nearly a decade.
I just think they feel that they are closer than they are. You know,
But can you rationalize why?
Yes.
Like, even if we try to put that, not tinfoil hat, Jim Irsay hat, and figure out what it is he sees that makes him think they're close.
I can justify exactly why and explain exactly why. 100%. Justify the thought process from Jim Irsay or the Colts that they are, in fact, very close. I will justify and explain and tell you exactly the genesis of that thought on the other side. And then James Boyd joins us top of the hour. Jim Irsay certainly has the power to change the direction of the Indianapolis Colts and decided to stay the course, at least for now. I only say that. I have no reason to believe that he will change his mind in the direction, but it has been done before, not just with the Colts, but just in general with organizations. So you always leave that possibility that things could go differently in play. But, Jimmy, you asked the question, which is a good one, of, how could Jim Irsay really get blinded into thinking that they might be a play here or a play there away from a completely different season. And I'm going to give you two personal experience. And yeah, listen, I love me some me, right? I don't mean to make it about me, except for that I think in sports sometimes we can take personal experience and turn it into then relatability for athletes. Because when it comes down to it, in the end, athletes, coaches, owners are all people like we are, right? But I think most people can relate to this. If you want to go with a very deep Freudian answer, it would be that Jim Irsay has had a difficult last 18 months from a health standpoint. I think that's well documented. I don't think I'm speaking out of school there. It's public. And it does change your mindset about things. Now, that's not to say that this is the first time that he's had health challenges, but I can speak from personal experience that when you go through a situation where you finally, for the first time, are facing the reality of your mortality, it does change your outlook and looking at things and prioritizing. Sometimes maybe even if your job is to get the most out of something, it can be good and bad, because you can, when things don't go well, you have a barometer by which to measure it, and your complacency and your ability to accept things and accept adversity and be comfortable with it increases because you've faced the most the most challenging situation and adverse situation that you can. There is no doubt about it. I mean, I can tell you, personally speaking, when someone said to me, you're facing the most critical 15 minutes of your life, the things that really gave me stress before that moment are totally different than things that would give me stress now. It's not to say I don't still have stresses, I don't still worry about things, but I have the ability now to say, yeah, but I mean, in the end, I know what matters most, right? And so maybe there's some of that comes into play. But the bigger thing I think that explains Jim Irsay's thought is this. That's the Freudian answer. The more realistic answer, Jimmy, the more simple answer, and probably the right answer is this. Again, to go back to in terms of relatability, I remember I was a diehard Indiana basketball fan, biggest IU basketball fan on the planet. Give me a year of the 80s off the top of your head. Boom, just give me a year. 1983. 1983, Indiana was ranked number 1 in the year. Ted Kitchell got injured with a back injury, missed a bunch of games. Indiana was ranked number 1 in November and December, and then they got into the NCAA tournament, and they lost in the NCAA tournament. I can't remember if it was Kentucky or UAB that eliminated them, but they came back the next year in 84, and they defeated Carolina 72-68 on March 22nd of 84, then went into the regional finals, lost to Virginia 50-48. Like, I was a big Indiana fan,
sure.
Right?
What'd you eat for dinner last week, Jake?
I have no clue, right? Exactly. So, in 1987, Indiana wins the national title. 1988, we have to do a bracket in Miss McQuiston's freshman English class and all come up with our own NCAA tournament bracket, fill it out. And I fill out Indiana to go to the Final Four. I'm convinced Indiana's going to the Final Four. They beat Iowa 116-89 to finish the regular season, so like Indiana's going to the Final Four. They barely got in the tournament. And they got beat by Richmond in the first round of the tournament. And everybody's like, how in the world did you have Indiana in the Final Four? And I'm like, well, because I really did think so-and-so was going to upset this team and Indiana was going to then do this and that. And I'm coming up with all these variations of the ball simply bouncing a different way. And the reason, Jimmy, I did that is because I was clouded by the fact that I was a fan. I was a fan. And when it comes down to it, Jim Irsay knows football and is a passionate owner, but I do think that he gets at times a pass for speaking for the fact that when it comes down to it, he's a fan. And what I talked about yesterday is The one time that he let his fandom go to the side to make an executive football decision was when he cut Peyton Manning. And quite frankly, since then, I think a lot of decisions that have been made because he is clouded by the fandom of thinking things are clearing up more than they really are, because you get swept up in false narratives and false optimism of thinking doors are going to open that in fact have like 7 different padlocks on them. I think it comes down to that.
And that's fair. It's funny to me, though, because, again, looking back on that decision, and we talked about it on Monday, it was the right call. Like, the state of where the Colts were at, even if you roll the dice and bring back Peyton Manning 13 years ago, it wouldn't have changed the trajectory of the franchise. You brought it up. It might have changed the interpersonal relationships of Peyton Manning post-football. You've outlined maybe his kids are at Park Tudor, right, instead of wherever they went to in Denver. Maybe some of the socioeconomic aspects and the relationship that the Colts and Peyton Manning have change. Their franchise outlook doesn't. Like, don't get me wrong, Peyton put together one of the most impressive, still to this day, individual seasons the sport has ever seen in 2013, and he did that because he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But he also did it with a Denver offense and defense that were a complete, further rounded team.
No question.
Than the Colts were.
No question.
So
you could make the argument the Broncos won the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning almost in spite of Peyton Manning.
Correct. Definitely when they won, right? The year they got there, you can make the argument that he helped carry them there. But the year they won it, the defense was the driving factor, something that, famously never had the perfect defense, at least to the level of Brady, and that's a whole other conversation during the course of his Colts tenure. But I say all that to say, Jake, you don't look at that decision and say he got burned there, do you? Because I don't. I think it was the right call. And so the thought that you would...
In the moment, in the vacuum, from a football business standpoint, it was the right call. No question.
And I still think today it is. So my further questioning is, you would think that the only reason to go back and get further into a ball of sentiment and feelings of the good old days and being clouded by that would be if the one time you made an executive decision away from your fandom, it was a negative result. And it wasn't. Like, they got the generational quarterback. It ended the wrong way.
Right.
Because he decided to hang it up, and no one could have... I mean, we could say with hindsight, I know you've brought this up before, how much he was really interested in football and all that. Nobody could have, even the most skeptics of Andrew Luck, foreseen the way it went down, it was going to end that way. So the overcorrection doesn't make sense to me because it wasn't the wrong decision. Even today, when I look back at it, I think he made the right move.
I agree with that. And no, in the moment, there's no question it was the right move. Right? That's what I'm saying. But
he's so guarded now, it feels like, by the fandom, and I don't understand fully why. Because the one time, to your point, you took the glasses off, it didn't fail.
Because, Jimmy, the one time that he made a business decision that was in the best interest of football, then at no fault somewhat of his own, it backfired. It was the right move, but because of the fact that the transition that he made into the next great franchise quarterback, and that franchise quarterback didn't fulfill the promise that he was hoping for, he is then guarded for it.
Because Luck didn't become Peyton. In terms of accolades, in terms of Super Bowls, and
Super Bowls.
Right.
Super Bowls. Andrew Luck was going to be the guy that got him multiple Lombardis. His words. And he had all the talent in the world, all the promise in the world, no question about it. And we could sit here and do, obviously, a show every day between now and New Year's as to whether or not, and the factors that went into Andrew Luck's decision to do that. But that's kind of along the same lines of, we're opening the phone lines. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame, yes or no? Then call and give us your Mount Rushmore, which is, obviously a whole different talk show, and one we're not going to do. But what we are going to do is talk to James Boyd about the direction of the Colts now moving forward, who may be in, who may be out for next year, and what we take away from the season that just ended. James Boyd, Athletic, next. in Indianapolis. For that matter, the 1 o'clock hour is underway everywhere in the Eastern time zone. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, Jimmy Cook, the other two voices you hear in this program.
I'm Eddie
Occasionally,
Garrison.
Eddie will just jump in out of nowhere screaming at the top of his lungs that he's a savage. Isn't that right, Eddie?
I'm Eddie Garrison, and I am a savage.
Okay. Have you ever seen that movie? I think is it Randy Savage or is it Roddy Piper that has a movie where he puts on the glasses and can see dead people? You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I know obviously
dead people.
both.
That's that Haley Joel Osment.
I know both of the Macho Man and Roddy Piper, but I don't know about the movie that you might be referring to with one of them.
I think it's called They Live. It's one of the best B movies ever. Like, it's one of those movies you're like, this movie is so bad, I don't even want to admit I'm watching it. And then 90 minutes later, you're like, I'm still watching, right?
Yes, They Live, yeah.
Do you know which one?
No, I
What
don't.
what year did that movie come out? I'm going to guess 85.
You're close.
4.
Does the
You're going
Macho
the
Man
wrong
do
way.
the voice during that movie?
87.
Getting closer.
Go ahead and hit me.
88.
All right, 1988. It's snubbed in the Oscars, by the way. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that entry, James Boyd is with The Athletic. James, we'll begin with this, and I want to make sure that we're clear because I'm obviously a known cynic. Chris Ballard, simply under the weather, right? I think there are those that will read into the fact that that press conference that was expected this morning with Chris Ballard was postponed. That is strictly a health issue, correct?
Yeah, he's just sick. I know people want to make jokes about it and things like that. But honestly, it would be more weird if they hadn't bagged him yet publicly. But I'm like, he has a job. He's not going anywhere, so he has no reason to duck out unless he's sick.
Now, the one thing I'll say, there is precedent of the opposite happening of what initially was expected or reported. Now, the Colts never, with Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano, came out and said one of them was gone and then held a presser to say they were there. But we were all anticipating it at that time. Late into the night, all of a sudden, we all get summoned out there, and Jim Irsay comes out and says that the 11th hour, it was a kumbaya, tears were shed, handshakes were exchanged, and we're attaching everybody at the hip. Do you anticipate any possibility that there could be a change of heart and, as a result, a change in some form of the leadership between coach or general manager in the next month or so with the Colts?
No, I don't. I always thought this was the most likely outcome, meaning they keep Steichen, they keep Ballard, and they get rid of Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator. So this wasn't a surprise to me, even though Irsay announced it when he did. To me, that was probably the most surprising part, was how quickly he did it. I'll thank him for that because it, saved me from twiddling my thumbs and kind of walking around in circles until some news broke. But at the end of the day, I think this was always the most likely outcome. So, no, I don't expect any changes to happen to general manager or the head coach. Those guys are in the saddle for the foreseeable future. And just keep in mind also, for Steichen, he's under contract through 2028. And then with Ballard, he's under contract through 2026. Though I know Ballard, obviously, his resume is a lot more disappointing than Steichen's through 2 seasons.
James, one area that I think fans would hope would change is from a philosophical standpoint of the way Chris Ballard goes about the job, perhaps being more aggressive in free agency, perhaps addressing areas in the draft that he hasn't focused on in previous years. As you are covering all of this, do you anticipate any philosophical changes for a man that's been in the job 8 seasons now, or will this pretty much be what he's done in the past with some minor tweaks?
That's a great question. I think, honestly, one of the biggest things he'll have to address is how he uses free agency. And I will say, for all the fans who are like, just spend money in free agency, all the teams should spend money, it doesn't usually work out that well for you if you spend a ton of money. Like, you look at the top teams from this past offseason when it comes to free agent spending. The Giants are number 1, Chiefs are number 2, Atlanta was number 3, Panthers are number 4, and the Raiders are number 5. So 4 of those 5 teams are terrible. They haven't made the playoffs. They didn't do anything good this year. Obviously, the Chiefs are the Chiefs. So I think with Ballard, it's just, can you spend any money? That's the thing that probably infuriates fans. It's like, we get you're drafting. Maybe you have to address some positions, which, I'm sure that'll be a big discussion. But to me, it comes down to, can you go out there and get some serviceable players, some plug-and-play guys who may not be a part of your long-term future, but can help you win now? Because as you keep saying, you're trying to win now, but we haven't seen it, going into year 9.
James Boyd is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. James, let's go back to the locker room after the game and in the days or so after. We'll begin with DeForest Buckner. I think DeForest Buckner's a pro's pro. As time has moved on here, I have grown to respect him even more, and really at times almost feel bad because it seems to me like DeForest Buckner looks like a guy that's like, fellas, this is not what I signed up for. Like, work with me here. And he's the elder statesman in the room. You're around it much closer than I. Am I off base?
No, I think that you are correct. I think this was probably the most upset I've seen DeForest Buckner, the most candid he's been when he was talking about ego and we're playing like individuals and this is the worst defense I've been a part of since I've been here. Believe me, he is probably the most respected player in that building. So when he speaks, people hear that. Chris Ballard hears that. Shane Steichen hears that. But for me, the thing I'll kind of push back on a little is like I don't feel all that bad for him because it's like, hey, you re-upped here. You re-signed here when they didn't have a quarterback figured out. You trusted Chris Ballard, for better or worse. And looking at his resume, maybe you shouldn't have. And so it's not like he can't ask out. I'm not saying I'm not reporting that he will or that he's made those decisions. No, he said he has no regrets. He wants to remain with the Colts. That's what he's told us, and I believe him. But I'm saying he could have been asked out, and he hasn't. So at the same time, it's like, look, if you can complain, but you also chose this, and you chose a franchise that has not been – basically relevant or consistently good since you've been traded here.
James, did you notice any, whether it be body language, presence, confidence, comfortability, did you notice any changes one way or the other from initially talking to Anthony Richardson to start the season as the starter to everything that happened between the tap out and everything in between to now in terms of, I know it's hard to get into headspace with just a brief media scrum, but how do you feel like he's changed in that area in terms of his overall persona and the way he handles things with the media in that regard with how crazy this year was?
Great question, Jimmy. I'll say that he definitely gives more mature answers. I mean, early on, it was kind of this happy-go-lucky, I'm excited, we're rolling, football is very fun. To now, I think his answers since the benching have been a lot more business-like, a lot more mature. But the caveat there is that the play hasn't really improved. I mean, we can all look at the Jets game and say, man, he turned the corner. And then he had another moment against the Patriots, that last drive. Other than that, the lows far outweighed the highs even after he got benched. I mean, the passing was still, not sustainable enough for you to have a real offense in the NFL. And so talking to him, I think that he's mature. I think that he's answered the questions more directly. I think that he's honest about his assessment and things like that. But by no means do I think that can necessarily help him, be the face of the franchise. You got to just play better at this point. But I did ask him directly, do you think next year is a make or break a year for you? And he said, what do you mean? And I was like, meaning another quarterback could replace you if you don't play well next year. And he, made it very clear, like, oh, yeah, I understand that. It is what it is. You can lose your job in a day, as he did this past season. And so he was just saying he has to handle his business, and we'll see what happens. But, the messaging from him is better, but again, if the play isn't better, not to be blunt, but who really cares?
James, everybody has. James Boyd's our guest from The Athletic on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. When I was a younger guy, I can recall times where there was, you'd meet somebody who was just like way out of your league, smoking hot. Like every guy knows that girl and every woman probably knows the guy that's like they're so good looking. They're, you're enamored by them, right? Every fifth time you call them, they actually answer the phone, and every third time you make plans, they actually follow through. And people are like, why do you keep like getting let down like this? And you're like, well, have you seen the person? Right?
I've been there.
Right. You get enamored by it, right? So, but eventually, even with that, even with dealing with the inconsistencies, the immaturities, and the crazies, you eventually move on from it because you realize, you know what? I thought I could change this person, but I'm going to leave it to somebody else's project. In the NFL, when a quarterback has all the traits, all the things that you love, but they can't complete passes, how long do you give it before you say, I now have to accept that the mechanics are never going to be routine, and this is what it is?
Wow, that is a loaded question and a good one. That's something I need to be asking myself the next time we talk to Chris Ballard. But I think that when it comes to Anthony, and obviously every team is different, QB situations are different, but when it comes to Anthony and the Colts, I think next year is that year to sort of, where the rubber meets the road and you have to produce or you have to move on or you have to at least think about that because at that point you're 3 years into his deal. His rookie contract obviously will be on the back end of it. You got to decide, if we don't move on from him, do we pay him? Do we keep him? Like, what's going on there? Do we pick up his fifth-year option? All of those things are factors that you have to consider. And so I think next year is the year to decide all of that. And quite honestly, he's up against it. To expect him to do two things he's never done basically his entire life, which is stay healthy and to be accurate, all of a sudden in year 3, after not being healthy or accurate through his first 2 years, I think that would be naive. Obviously, they're going to be optimistic about it. Why wouldn't you be? You picked the guy. You have to be optimistic at least a little bit. But, yeah, Jake, that's a great question. And I do think that next year is the moment. That is the window. And if it doesn't work out, you have to start thinking about contingency plans and how do you move on, because you can't run it back after that, in my opinion. Others might disagree, but I think 3 years, if you get a guy 3 years with your franchise, the same offense, you give him a chance to grow, you bench him so he can be more mature, all those things, and it still doesn't work in year 3, at some point you got to just say, hey, I struck out, and it is what it is. Now, does it have to cost people their jobs? Perhaps it does, but as we know, Chris Ballard has 9 lives here going into his 9th season.
James, Anthony Richardson got, I'll say better, but he started to show in some of the areas that were needed for improvement. They started to show themselves once it was taken away from him. Joe Flacco's not going to be here next year. Anthony Richardson was handed the keys too early. Who do they bring in then to push him, to let him know that it's still not a guarantee week in and week out next year?
That's a great question. I think they have to bring in somebody who is a QB1, at least caliber quarterback.
Correct.
Maybe that's a Justin Fields. Maybe that's Jameis Winston. Who knows what his press conferences would be like here in Indianapolis. But I think you have to bring in somebody who can really challenge him and perhaps even mentor him to a certain degree. I don't know how much mentoring Justin Fields would be interested in doing at this stage of his career. But, again, I don't think you should go into next season and have it where it's so obviously clear no matter what he does, he's going to be the guy, because I think a little of that might have affected the way he approached the game going into last season, and obviously why he ended up losing his job to Joe Flacco. So we'll see. I think that's something, again, we have to ask Chris Ballard. And Jake, if you want to, come sit next to me in the press conference, by all means, brother, I got an extra seat for you.
Listen, I was gonna come this morning, honestly, because one of the questions I want to ask him, James, I want to ask Chris Ballard this. Matter of fact, James, I'm going to present a question I want to ask Chris Ballard, and then I want you to tell me if you think it's a fair question. You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Hey, Chris, quick question for you. I realize that the NFL, there is a salary cap, and every team has a maximum they can spend in the offseason. You had $50 million to spend. Now you are in the middle of the league in that, but there have been other years where you've had more. Are you operating under the same salary cap as every franchise, or do you have a limit placed on your owner to go underneath what is expected?
Woo! That is the question. It honestly is, because when you look at how certain teams spend, it's not necessarily how much cap space you have. I think we went over this actually when the Lamar Jackson stuff was popping up. People were like, well, a team approached them. And when people were asking me about could he come to the Colts, it's like, yeah, in theory, but at the same time, does the owner have $200 million guaranteed in the bank right now to give this guy if he signs? And so that is a question I think that a lot of GMs probably don't even want to answer truthfully, because at the end of the day, it does come down to how much your owner is willing to spend. And, that's something that definitely is a factor in every team's decision. So brilliant question. Obviously, I don't think he would answer that. But to me, everything is fair at this point. People ask me what's a fair question. I mean, obviously, I won't get up there and curse anybody out, disrespect anybody. But when you've had this product the last however long during this era of just irrelevant Colts football, every question is fair at this point, because you haven't done anything to make it fair or make us feel otherwise.
Colts beat writer for The Athletic, James Boyd, is our guest. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. James, when I look bigger picture for the ramifications of them bringing back Ballard, Steichen, and Richardson, and Ballard most notably for season number 9 now, I'm not just worried about the Colts setting themselves back another year if this doesn't go well. And I don't think it's going to go well. I've seen enough at this point where I think they kind of are what they are, and the idea of somebody being able to change everything they do about the job in a year, or Anthony Richardson suddenly taking a leap forward, I don't see it happening. I hope for Colts fans' sake I'm wrong, but I don't see it happening, and that's another year wasted for them if I'm right. But what would also be wasted for them is another year of development, of growth, and of separation by the Houston Texans, who feel like they have the franchise quarterback already, who, while he and C.J. Stroud took a step back this year, notably dealt with decimating injuries to his wide receiver core. When you look at Houston and the idea of them having another year to get a leg up in the South, even though it's been a division that has been topsy-turvy in the decade since the Colts last hoisted that crown, do you see it that same way, that they're not only in danger of setting themselves back for internal development, that the gap between the South and them might be even further a year from now?
Yeah, I think that's always a possibility. And I think one of the things that was interesting from what Jim Irsay said in the locker room after the game was a couple of different plays, we have a different year. And I'm like, yeah, and he meant it in a positive manner, probably meaning, hey, a couple of different plays. We win the Denver game, we win the Giants game, and we're in the playoffs. But you can also say, well, you only had, I think Kevin Bowen said it this morning, he had 8 wins this year, and I believe all of them were about one possession. So a couple plays the other way, and you're 5 and whatever, you're 4 and whatever. And so I do think that there's always possibility for slippage, and there's even more when it feels like you don't have a clear vision. And as you all know, I'm sure the quote went everywhere. I've had many people ask me who said it. I will never say, but there was a Colts player who said there's no vision here. And so I think that's a part of what we're talking about when it comes to this team and the gap between them and Houston or even other teams that might have had, some success. And then you look at the rest of the division, Trevor Lawrence is going to be healthy. He's getting, obviously a new coach in there as well. And then the Titans have the number 1 pick, who said they don't go out and get their guys to turn things around. So obviously I still think the division, even going into next year, is wide open because it always is, it seems like. But there is definitely some room for improvement for the Colts, but room for them to take a step back because you just don't know what you're going to get from the coach, from the GM, or from the quarterback. And those 3 pillars determine a lot of your success when it comes to your franchise.
Was it a player who has been with another franchise and thus has relativity of vision?
Can't say.
It's a good try, wasn't it?
That was a great try.
Do you think that somebody asked me this question? I think it's a good one. Is Jim Irsay is he as an owner like the parent that wants to become friends with his kids? In other words, is kind of the fandom of Jim Irsay now and being around the guys starting to cloud his overall ability to understand where they are and how far away they are?
I think I look at it twofold from his messaging, especially from that speech that he gave in the postgame locker room. I'm writing the story right now, actually, so I guess you can just get the oral version right now. But I think that when it comes to Irsay, he was rightfully optimistic after a game because he was talking to his players. You're not going to go into a room after your players have, put their bodies on the line in a meaningless game, and, you got Julian Blackman playing through a torn labrum, you got Pittman playing with a fractured back, and say, you guys stink. I don't really care about this win. Get your act together. So I'm just telling you optimistic from that perspective. But then the tone deafness part comes in where it's like, is he that fan where he's saying, oh, we're 1-0 in 2025? Who cares? I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow. So I do think that he has become more realistic. You haven't heard him talk about Lombardis in quite a while. But maybe he's, swayed too far in the other direction where it's just like it comes off, even though that might have been his intention, it comes off like, oh, we're 8-9. We worked hard. We played hard. It is what it is. Like, that's just not acceptable.
So, James, the more important question, because you acknowledge that it's been there for you in the past, when you had the, smoking hot chick that was really kind of a hassle, how long did you give that before you punted? Great
question. I gave it, maybe I'm just bogus, but I gave it 3 months. And I was like, after about that second month, I was like, I'm going to try to make this work. But, after that. And then I'm used to being, single and living the bachelor life anyways. I was like, nah, we're not going to do this too much longer. And, no hard feelings at all. I was just like, this ain't my type of vibe.
How often do you cook your own meal? I've never in my life, 52 years old, I've never cooked a dinner. Right? And I mean, I've made a peanut butter sandwich, but I've never prepared a meal for myself. Now, people think that's crazy. But from the time that I was, the first 15 years of my professional career, I worked in TV, where my work shift was basically 2 p.m. to midnight, right? So I would grab something between shows at dinner. How often do you, as the bachelor who gives it 3 months before you punt on a relationship, how often do you cook?
For her or for myself?
For yourself. In general, how
For
often
myself,
have you prepared a meal for
I'm
yourself?
not gonna lie. During the season, it is very rare that I'm cooking anything because we get so many meals when it go on the road and press box. But I would say out of season, I'm cooking probably once or twice a week, and I can actually cook. Like, I'm not some great crazy cook, but I'm also not just like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. Like, I can make a decent meal, and I've made a few of them.
What about
just
bake?
gotta follow the steps.
Can you bake?
Cook.
Like, can you make cookies and cakes and pies? Are you a baker?
Nah. Baking, I feel you got to be a scientist. I'm not a scientist at all.
My idea of cooking is hitting 3-2-5 start, right?
Nah. I can go down. I got all my spices. I got my little thing. My mom bought me a new pot for Christmas, so I'm good.
Okay, well, that's impressive. When do you anticipate, James Boyd of The Athletic, Express Pro Tire and Auto Gas Line, when do you anticipate that we will, A, hear from Chris Ballard, and then B, is there really any more news to come out, or are we basically now, up until the draft, just resigned to the fact that this is what it is?
I don't know as far as Chris Ballard. I was a bit surprised they just didn't immediately say, hey, he's still under the weather. We'll talk Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, and
maybe we'll hear
for those that don't know,
week.
James, for those that don't know, they sent an email that simply said postponed, no scheduled events on Wednesday. Chris Ballard postponed. That's all it said. Then independently, I think they clarified to people that he wasn't feeling well.
Exactly. They texted us in like this group chat that we had, the team, for the Colts writers, and basically said he wasn't under the weather, wasn't feeling well. So maybe next week we hear from him. And as far as other changes that could be made, I think the biggest thing is just waiting on, okay, could the next time he speak be after they hire the defensive coordinator, and maybe we get two birds in one stone when he's healthy enough to talk again. We're not asking, okay, what about the defensive coordinator? We're asking, okay, who did you choose and why did you choose him kind of way.
James Boyd with The Athletic, and you mentioned you are working on a story. What else is upcoming here that we can look out for? Because great job on the piece with Zach.
Appreciate that. Yeah, that was one we had worked on for a few months. And then obviously, like I said, I'm working on this piece just about Irsay's messaging in the locker room. Maybe if it's way too far from being too optimistic to just now too apathetic with the state of the team. And then also I'll have something coming soon on the free agents, who should stay, who should go, just sharing my thoughts and also what they've said about their futures when it comes to guys like Ryan Kelly, Mo Cox, EJ Speed, and others. All
right, James, appreciate it. We will be looking for exactly that. Appreciate the time today.
Sounds good. You all have a good one.
All right, that is the maestro, Chef Boyardee, James Boyd from The Athletic on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Jimmy has not been able to cook for himself in the last couple of days because Jimmy's not been able to eat a lot in the last couple of days because Jimmy's tummy is starting to get just a little bit tight. I'll explain why and what I'm talking about next. Here's the thing. This song starts out by saying, talk about things that nobody cares. I hope we don't do that on this show, right?
That's why we have the focus groups, Jake.
The focus groups say people definitely want to hear about the Colts. I know it's difficult after the season that they just had and the way that it ended.
They're also talking about things that nobody wears, Jake. I don't know if you
That's
caught
true.
that too.
Which of the three of us more often wears something that nobody else wears?
Me.
100%.
Yeah. I'm self-aware.
I don't know a lot of people that wear T-shirts with Snoopy and Tumbleweed wearing Chiefs hats, right?
It's fair.
I don't know how many people wear a Chiefs wedding band.
It's also fair. Hey, I had the self-awareness to say it was me. I understand it's me.
That's true. That's the first step, Jimmy.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tomorrow night, the college football playoffs resume with the semifinal that I've been saying forever is going to be the one that puts Notre Dame into the national championship game. Notre Dame and Penn State at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. That game tomorrow night. Then Friday, it is Ohio State and Texas. Ohio State and Texas, by the way, technically the Cotton Bowl, but that's played at Jerry World. So the weather, I guess it's going to be really ugly in Dallas. But that's not going to be a factor. They're indoors.
So it's going to be 12 degrees? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, honestly, I've heard it's like an ice storm down there, right? Remember
really?
the Super Bowl the year before it was here was in Dallas, and they had an ice storm, and it shut the whole city down. And then they had it here, and it was like 60 degrees, and people were ziplining everywhere. But let's get to Notre Dame and Penn State. Look, Penn State to me, Jimmy, James Franklin, this is kind of the white whale for James Franklin in his tenure at Penn State. And by that, I mean a big, significant game and chalking that up and getting a win. I mean, yes, they obviously were impressive in the quarterfinal in beating Boise State. But how much did we really know about Boise State? This is obviously a different challenge for them in Notre Dame. But you also have, with the Fighting Irish, a team that is, so steep in tradition. And to your point, probably just got their biggest win in 3 decades. I really like Marcus Freeman. I love Notre Dame's defense, and I love their ability, if they get out front, to utilize the ground to control clock. I think they beat Penn State. But maybe I'm selling Penn State short.
I think that on paper, Notre Dame, despite the injuries they've had this year, is still the better team. I think that if they're able to execute the running game that has been so complementary to everything else they do as a unit, Jeremiah Love sounds like it's going to be good to go. He'd had that injury against USC to end the year and then tweaked it against Georgia. But as long as he's good, and Jadarian Price has done a great job in relief, and Riley Leonard is more of a run-first quarterback, so they will still have running game elements. But that defense has been so good for them. I'm with you. I feel like they are going to win tomorrow, and it's a weird feeling in my Notre Dame fandom because, generally speaking, there's high-level anxiety about these games. Not to say I'm not nervous about it. I am. You teased the segment with, stomach getting tight a little bit. It definitely is, but it's the most optimistic I've been, and maybe this is the omen of the other shoe's going to drop. High school senior me felt very optimistic still going into that national title game against Alabama. That was over after about 2 drives. So maybe I should be more worried than I am. It was long. Oh, okay. Maybe I am giving even still too much credit there, but I felt optimistic and hopeful and this great defense and who cares about it? But the sport has changed. With NIL and the way that these teams are formatted, you're no longer going up against a foe in the Big Ten like Penn State or a foe in the SEC like Georgia and feeling like you are top to bottom overmatched where it matters most, which is in the trenches. So, yeah, I feel good about their chances, but I also hate to bend the knee to you in this regard. It all somewhat feels like a moot point if Ohio State has finally figured it out and the team that just throttled Oregon in literally 2 plays, Eddie, is the offense that they've now unlocked en route to a national title. But I can't worry about that. You can only worry about Penn State right now. I'm optimistic. Do you, as the Notre Dame, I don't want to say hater, but you don't really care for the Irish, how would you gauge my overall level of optimism here going into this game?
Well, listen, I told you when the playoffs, I think, were announced, it was going to be Notre Dame and Ohio State in the national title game.
You did.
I don't think anybody's coming within 2 screens. If Ohio State plays their game. Now, Ohio State is enigmatic because Chip Kelly, who, at Oregon, and everybody thought it was going to translate into the NFL and then at UCLA. But we know that when he has weapons, Chip Kelly can literally just let those horses run, right? Why he did not do that against Michigan is astounding to me. I mean, against Michigan, Ohio State tried to outrun Michigan, and the only time that they were able to outrun them was when they were able to chase down dudes that were about to plant a flag, right? But you saw against Oregon, I don't know if that was statement Ryan Day, statement Chip Kelly, I don't know which it was, but Ohio State has Sunday receivers. Ohio State has probably, they've got at least, at minimum, how many NFL players from an offensive skill position standpoint are there on Ohio State's roster?
On any given year, there's 2 to 3 at minimum.
Both wide receivers, Emeka Ibuka and Jeremiah
Smith would start for the Colts next year.
Both running backs.
I'm not kidding you. Jeremiah Smith may well be the best player in college football. Why he was not, I didn't watch week in and week out, but his separation, his ability,
reminds me of Julio Jones.
Yeah, Jeremiah Smith is really, really good. When they turn up the wick and they decide they want to throw the football, and give credit to Will Howard. When he's got to place the ball into difficult spots, he does exactly that. I just had this conversation last night. There are NFL windows and there are college windows. And
now, what do you mean by that, Jake?
Trevor Lawrence, I think, is really special. I really do. I think Trevor Lawrence has Peyton Manning tendencies. I still think that. I think the thing that hurt him most coming in, aside from the total dysfunction that's taken place in Jacksonville, but one of the things that hurt him, and it might have even hurt Mac Jones. Maybe it helped Mac Jones because it elevated his getting him on the radar. But when I say windows are different, in college football, when you are throwing the ball, you have a second and a half for the ball to get there. In the NFL, you've got a quarter of a second for the ball to get there. And it goes back to what we've talked about a lot when Manning was a rookie, and I can't remember if it was Tom Moore or Bruce Arians. It might have been Tom Moore, where he came to the sidelines and they said, you got to throw that ball. And Manning said, well, he wasn't open. And they said, no, this is the NFL. He was open in the NFL. He was not open for you at Tennessee. That window is an NFL window. And it took Manning a while to learn that. He threw more interceptions as a rookie than anybody in the history of the league. But I think what hurts a Trevor Lawrence and what hurt probably a Mac Jones was the fact that they were throwing to guys in college that were Sunday receivers, and as a result, the windows were huge because they had separation. You're throwing to T. Higgins and Justin Ross and guys like that, and Jerry Jeudy and whatever. You're throwing to guys where you don't have to worry about where the defender is. Then you get into the league and you got to worry about that. Will Howard right now is being able to throw to big windows, but he had plays in that Oregon game where Oregon was playing really tight coverage and he was putting the football in an NFL window. And I'm not saying the guy's an NFL quarterback, but in that game he was. And when you have when you have the combination of guys that can get separation, but then when they're pinched, especially in short yardage, first and goal from the 8 situations, you got to throw in the corner, back shoulder, whatever else, and he's putting it right there. There's nothing you can do about it. Nothing, right?
I think the only thing that a Texas or a Notre Dame or a Penn State, however you want to, play out the potential matchups for who faces Ohio State the rest of the way, is hoping for is that there have been lulls in the way that Ohio State is matched up against other teams. You look at not just the Michigan game, but you look back to how Indiana was able to make life difficult for Ohio State. And maybe you lean on that idea of it. But yeah, if Smith is, into the open and just torching any window of opportunity, and Howard's throwing the ball like that, no one's going to touch him. They're going to be national champions. You will have been right with your prediction to start the playoff, and Ryan Day will get to be able to quietly at parties laugh about losing to Michigan yet again because he's a national champion. Like, that's how that will ultimately play out, even though some of the most diehard of Ohio State fans, with how insane that fan base can be, are more mad about the Michigan loss still, even if they win the national championship. But for the idea of there has been lulls within their offense prior to the playoffs, and granted, 2 high-quality, dominant performances against Tennessee and then against Oregon, to the point that maybe you think they've figured things out now, there is still enough of a reason, if you're Texas, if you're Notre Dame, if you're Penn State, to think this isn't suddenly the greatest offense in college football, right? Like, there have been limitations to what they can do on the field. The question is, has Chip Kelly now completely unlocked everything and they are, rightfully so, the betting favorite to win a national title, or does Texas make enough plays and Quinn Ewers makes enough plays in that game where they're sent home in the Cotton Bowl?
Listen, first off, it is interesting because with Texas, we don't even talk about Texas and the fact that, to your point, Quinn Ewers, I mean, here's a guy, he's going against a team that he's played with, before. We know the whole story there. It's not like Texas is Texas A&I here, right?
No.
But doesn't it feel like they are a step below Ohio State? Speaking more about Ohio State than Texas, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to Texas.
I was talking to an Ohio State fan the other day, a friend of mine, and he said that he's more fearful of Texas than he is anybody. He still thinks that Ohio State's going to win and win comfortably, but...
Well, they always think that.
Well, right, I understand that, but just to clarify it, he's not like worried like, oh, are they going to lose? No,
is there
he
a Ohio
thinks
State fan ever worried about anything besides Michigan?
Probably not, Eddie. I'd assume Buckeyes fans are pretty chill individuals in terms of what they worry on the regular.
Chill.
In terms of what they're worried about, no, because you have a great program.
Eddie's
you're
been
always
the opposite
turned out
of chill today.
Yes,
Eddie earlier today, Eddie jumped up in a roid rage.
State.
Do you think well played? Do you think the supplies run out?
Yes.
Is that what happened today?
Yes. Eddie's out of his watermelon gummies celebrating the fact that he won a fantasy football league that for the last 4 weeks he was the only one that realized was still going on. Congratulations.
Doesn't matter. I get free food out of this.
That's right. Free Illuminatis, right?
That's a good prize.
Yes.
It's a really good prize.
That is a good prize.
Maybe my only friend Alec will hang out with me now.
Who would, if you are docking Ohio State from the record books, you're eliminating them from the field, who do you like the most? Who would you hitch your wagons to if you're picking one of the 3 of Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame?
I always kind of like Texas.
Sure.
You mean as a fan?
Yeah.
I really like Marcus Freeman. Honestly, I kind of like Notre Dame. I think they're fun to watch. I just like the way he carries himself. It would probably be Notre Dame. But in all honesty,
and a lot of people say that because of Marcus Freeman. Like, that's always people that don't like Notre Dame in your camp had total disdain as Brian Kelly being the embodiment of what people don't like. And I understand wildly polar opposites between the two of them, but most people, if they say, yeah, I like Notre Dame now, it's because of Marcus Freeman.
So over Ohio State. So basically anybody but Ohio State, right?
Well, and you have a chance to have, long droughts ended either way, as long as it's not Ohio State, right? Because they won a decade ago.
I mean,
now
I'd
it's still
root for the
a long time,
Russian hockey team against Ohio State, right? Like, let's go. By the way, here's a win for you. Coming up.
I hope somebody plants their flag.
Can you imagine that? Pat Boylan going to join us top of the hour. We'll talk about the Pacers. A couple of guys that may not be on the floor tonight against the Bulls at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. On the other side, Jimmy, think about this question. You ready?
Yes.
Oregon has been, for the last 15, 20 years in college football, amongst the best of the best. They have absolutely been one of the preeminent programs, but year in and year out, they are one of them that is a favorite to win a national title or roll in a bowl game, and then they come up short. Now, granted, the University of Oregon won the very first ever NCAA tournament back in 1939, but in the last 20 years, give me the college basketball program that is the equivalent. The college basketball program that every year you're like, here they go, and then you're like, okay, coming up short again. Give me your answer, other side, Pat Boylan in 15. moments from now, I mentioned that Jimmy's stomach is tight because of the fact Notre Dame is taking on Ohio State tomorrow night. Is it tomorrow night, right?
You are correct.
Our buddy Brian Kelly from the shop, big Ohio State fan, said, I'm being rude, go Bucks. I get it. But
Big family guy.
Wait. Are we sure it's that Brian Kelly?
yeah, it's not the former coach Brian Kelly. It's Brian Kelly that owns the shop, which is the coolest store in Indianapolis, of course,
Love
in
the
terms
shop.
of retro T-shirts. The best, right? And Brian's a good dude. Saw him after the Pacer game the other night. Good dude.
Would you say that about me?
That you're a good dude?
Yeah.
Or that I saw you after the Pacer game? Because I
Yes.
do occasionally see that. That's a good question. I would say that you're a complex individual, Eddie.
Thanks.
The Pacers may not be with Miles Turner tonight. He is battling an illness. Tyrese Halliburton also questionable.
I think he was
We
hanging
shall
with Chris
see.
Ballard.
Exactly. Well, I'm telling you what, though. I mean, there is definitely stuff going around.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
So I get
for
it.
sure.
Now,
We
I was
kid.
talking about the college basketball program that's the equivalent of the University of Oregon in football. To me, there's one. As soon as I said it, I thought that's probably a dumb question because there's an easy answer here. Team that for 20, 25 years has been a cream of the crop, but when it comes down to the brass tacks, they seemingly fall short. Go ahead.
Michigan State.
Okay, not bad. Eddie, that's a good one.
Gonzaga.
I think that's it. Gonzaga. Because Gonzaga's typically, like Oregon and Gonzaga both are ranked. Now, let me tell you this.
I've always been kind of a Gonzaga hater up until the last 5 or 10 years, but I will say for them to finally at least get to that game when every year you were, and it happened, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Maybe it's 4 years ago now, gosh. But for them to finally get there, for years it was, this is the team, pick them, they're in the 1 seed, they're going to make it all the way to the Final Four, and they never got there. At least they finally broke through in that regard. They've never hoisted it all, to your point, but I think the Zags have sort of pushed back on that
By the way, I said
and fought the accusations.
I'm getting
the last
ahead of
couple
myself.
years.
I said Notre Dame taking on Ohio State. They're taking on Penn State, obviously.
Freudian slip for how excited you are for your
I'm telling
prediction.
you, because and thank you to Phil Sanchez for pointing that out. It's going to be Notre Dame and Ohio State in the national title game. Ohio State taking on Texas, obviously. What I meant to say.
Who did
So my apologies.
who did Penn State beat, Jake?
Boise State.
Okay.
Why?
We had a request for somebody in the chat to ask you to say that again.
They want me to say Boise. I get it.
They didn't know if you said boy C or boy Z.
I say Boise, but I used to say Boise. Now, interesting story because my Gonzaga story relates to my Boise State story, right?
I'd do it the second way.
I probably, if I'm saying quickly, I say Boise State, but Boise, Ohio, or Boise, Idaho, I mean. So, the reason why I've always had a soft spot for Gonzaga is because I've always felt guilty for Gonzaga University. In 1997, I took a road trip. My buddy Dave Steinberg, my buddy Mike Byron, and I loaded up Byron's Trailblazer and said, you know what, his Chevy Blazer, and we said, we are going to just start driving west.
Where
No
he did not
itinerary.
lose the keys.
Did not lose the keys,
Or
right?
his wallet.
Or his wallet. No itinerary at all. We're just going to drive. We're going to take 10 days and drive. It's the best 10 days of my life. We went to national parks. It was awesome. We rolled into Boise, Idaho at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to a Denny's restaurant. I ordered a baked potato for all three of us, and they were out of baked potatoes. I'm like, that is impossible. We're in Idaho. But we got our way to Spokane, Washington. Now, at this time, Gonzaga had just, Dan Munson, I think, was their coach. They had just started to break through and had they were kind of like Butler at that time. They'd had a Cinderella run to the Sweet 16, and they had just gotten on the map. So we knew, Gonzaga, John Stockton played there, and it's in Spokane. So we're like, let's find John Stockton's dad owned a bar. We're like, let's go to that bar, but first let's get something to eat, and then we'll go to the campus of Gonzaga as well. We went to a place in Spokane, Washington, cool city, by the way, called Senior Froggies, which I think it might be a chain. I don't know. They're not here locally, so I don't think I can get sued for saying this. So we go to Senior Froggies. It was good. I'll say it was good. We get in the car to find Gonzaga. Pre-Waze days, map on your phone days, so we're just asking people directions. And within a couple of blocks, all three of us are kind of doing the tailbone shimmy on the seat, right? Like, man. And then all of a sudden, the sweats start coming, and we're like, I mean, I know we're in Spokane, it's not that hot here. Turn up the AC, would you? And then within about 4 or 5 blocks, now all of us are sitting on the last corner 1/8 of an inch of the seat, doing the total shimmy, right? Like we're doing the penguin walk,
Yeah.
Except for that we're in the seat, and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what we ate, but whatever it was, I mean, that it is going through us like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like a fire hose.
Literally, I mean, all three of us suddenly are Mount St. Helens, right? So literally, we are pulling into the campus of Gonzaga University, and we are all, I mean, it's ugly. Every door's locked. The university's closed. It's like a Sunday afternoon. We finally find one bathroom, and I will simply say I've always felt guilty. I've had a guilt about Gonzaga, but I'm telling you, man, Senor Froggy's like good place. And then later, I met somebody from Spokane. I said, "Have you ever been to Senor Froggy's?" I'm like, "Dude, I think the Board of Health condemned that place." Okay.
2 questions. One, single stall, or do we have multiple toilets by which to take
I don't
care
think
of?
it matters, Jimmy.
I mean, it somewhat
There was no-
matters.
I will say there was no taking turns. We went into, fortunately, one that had like 4. Yes.
Second, does friend of yours and I believe still friend of the show, the pride of the Gales at St. Mary's, Randy Bennett, know about your guilt towards Gonzaga?
Randy Bennett would probably be. He would be the one person thrilled to know of the remnants that we left for Gonzaga, because as an arch rival, Randy Bennett, the head coach of the Gales, would probably surely be.
Please tell me you didn't pull a Jerry Jones either.
No, we washed our hands.
Good.
Yes, Jerry Jones, who absolutely destroyed a bathroom at the convention center and then insisted on shaking my hand, and he did not wash his hands. And I'm like, it was very uncomfortable. Pat Boylan, who I'm sure is very uncomfortable with that segue, is going to join us next. Did you happen to see last night? No, actually, it was not last night. 2 nights ago. Although it was last night was the first time I saw it. The dunk that was turned in the Bulls-Spurs game over Victor Wembanyama.
I did.
I don't know how often he gets dunked on, right? Not often? Is that fair to say?
Yes. And enough that it's still noteworthy if it happens for a highlight reel.
And here's the thing. Whenever guys get dunked on, like, people are like, oh, man, he got posterized. And I'm like, yeah, that means that he's, like, attempting to play defense at least, right? Kobe White had one that was pretty impressive. No question about that. He is going to be here tonight for the Chicago Bulls, Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And the Pacers in action, as we mentioned, Miles Turner and Tyrese Halliburton are both in question. Turner's case, it would be illness, and it doesn't look like he may go. Enrique Freeman did not play earlier today in the Mad Ants game. As for Tyrese Halliburton, here to join us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, you will hear him on the radio broadcast, along with Mark Boylan and Eddie Gill. Pat Boylan joins us on the program. Pat, the situation with Halliburton from an injury standpoint would be what?
Surprising to me, news to me when I saw it on the injury report. It wasn't a scenario, at least, where I caught it, albeit you know this. I do the road games from the studio that you're in, and I'm not on site, so sometimes there are things I miss in a road game that I wouldn't miss in a home game, but not something I immediately saw, not something that Rick Carlisle addressed post-game, and so hopefully it's just something small and perhaps lingering and not going to cost him any time, but unfortunately I don't know much more than that, and we'll find out tonight at about 5:15.
The reality is the team is playing very well, and a big part of that, Pat, is I think Tyrese Halliburton. And not necessarily – it's interesting because I think Halliburton at the beginning of the season, and I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with this, his aggression in terms of trying to score the basketball, to me, he has to be assertive in scoring first, and that then facilitates him getting others involved. I think at the beginning of the year, he was trying to get others involved to facilitate then him getting his shots. And he's now flipped that, and that has turned things around. Am I overthinking it?
Yeah, I think there's something to the mindset at a minimum. I don't know if Halliburton is ever going to be a score-first guy, but I think the mindset there is the key, which is getting himself into positions where he's getting 2 feet in the paint, where he's attacking, where he's being aggressive, because when he can get 2 feet into the paint, he's in a great spot. Usually he's either got a good look at the rim, or because he's gotten there, he's freed somebody else up. We know he's got great vision. He had an interesting quote, which I think, I've heard a lot of Pacers fans say over the course of the last month plus when he was struggling. It was interesting to hear him address it, and he addressed it without being directly asked about it. He said he's watched some tape, and there are times where he's watching the tape and he's not realizing in game that he's got a layup, and instead he's passing his way out of it. So I think certainly in those instances, when he's got a look near or at the rim and he's somewhat open, I think you're seeing him lately kind of pivot more to finishing those, which he absolutely has to do. For me, I think his scoring doesn't necessarily need to be at certainly not a 30 or even a 25 point per game type of thing, but it has to be consistent enough that it lifts the offense to the point of where they want to be from an efficiency standpoint. And the numbers really bear that out. They're interesting. When Halliburton has scored single-digit points this year, the Pacers are 0-7. But the good news about it is all he's had to do this season is get to 10 or higher, and they're 19-11. So what that says to me is they don't need him to necessarily be the 35-point scorer that he was, a couple of days ago in Miami. That's probably not realistic. But if he can just be consistent enough where he's at minimum into the teens or, ideally I think into the 20s, then the Pacers have a really good record once he's done that. So I think if anything, it's bringing up his scoring floor to the level of where even on off nights, he's still able to put up a decent number of points himself to go along with his passing. I think that goes a long way in explaining what you've seen lately. And I think if you look at the Brooklyn game, that's a good example of that, because he had a few games going into that where he was spectacular. And the Brooklyn game was not his A game, but he still found a way to get 23 and 8. not a great Brooklyn team, but the Pacers won fairly handily, and I think those two things go hand in hand.
Is this the closest in terms of the way that they're playing or the level they're playing? Is this the closest that the Pacers have been to last year?
Yeah, I think no question. And look, they had a few nice spurts at the beginning portion of the season, but maybe a game here, a game there that stand out. But if you looked at where this team was on December 8th, they weren't just 10-15, but if you looked at those 10 wins, very, very few of them were wins that were comfortable. I think 9 or maybe even all 10 of them fit under the NBA's category of a clutch game, which is if the game is within 5 points in the final 5 minutes at any point, that's considered a clutch game. And I have to go back and look. I think either 9 or maybe all 10 of those wins were in that category, which means they weren't blowing anybody out. And in a couple of those cases, you get a 5-point game with 5 minutes to go and you win by 12. That doesn't exactly feel close. But that was one of the things that I had kind of noted that had concerned me some was the Pacers just aren't winning any of these games really convincingly early in the season. And if you look at what they're doing lately, it's been the opposite. Almost every single win with a few minutes to go, the game has fell in hand. And in fact, in 2025, we're just talking 3 games here, but in the 3 games in 2025, the Pacers have trailed for a total of 6 minutes. So I think that is the statistic right there that just kind of goes to show you not only is this team winning more, but they're winning more and they're playing regularly more convincingly. And the first Boston game was not good. The Pacers got blown out. If you take that away, which you can't, but I'm just saying if you take that away and you look at all the other games, their other 2 losses in that stretch were games that they played pretty well in for a good majority of the time. So I think it's the consistent extended play here. We're talking, a month after that December 8th game. So a month of really good play overall.
Pat Boylan is our guest, part of the Pacers radio network. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Pat, I know you and play-by-play voice Mark Boyle like to subscribe to the idea of letting the season play out a bit before you declare definitively what a team is or isn't. I know you highlighted the first week of December. I'd like to go a little bit further back than that. On December 4th, the Pacers lose 99-90 to the Nets. They fall to 9-14 on the season. But more significantly to my question, 2-11 on the road. Much closer to, say, the Washington Wizards or the Toronto Raptors than the top of the Eastern Conference. Since then, they've gone 8-1. I know they can't control how the schedule's made up, but you could have very easily on December 4th said, this is a team that folds when they go away from Gainbridge Fieldhouse, that can't handle road environments, and they're out of sorts for whatever reason when they leave Indianapolis. That's now changed. I know that goes to some of what you just answered, but specifically on the road, what is it that they've unlocked now where they're back to where you would like them to be when they're away from Gainbridge?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating stretch of just watching this team on the road because they were, as you note, from a record standpoint, one of the very worst in the NBA right around that time, and they've been the best road team in the league since then. 8-1 is the best road record of any team in the NBA since that point. I tend to think some of that is water finding its level just generally. I think there's no way they were as bad as 2-11, and even some of the great teams in NBA history would love to go 8-1 over a 9-game road stretch. So I think some of that is just water finding its level, but I think it's extremely important that it happened because when you're playing like they were on the road at the beginning portion of the season, there's so much pressure to be perfect or near perfect at home because if you don't take care of home and you're playing like that on the road, then you risk digging yourself into a massive hole. The Pacers, as you noted, were 9-14, and then a couple games later they were 10-15. That wasn't good, but it wasn't the type of hole that they couldn't get their way out of. So to me, that had to change and had to change fairly dramatically and had to change really about when it happened. You can't be, running along at a 20, less than a 20% win clip on the road for any extended stretch of the season and end up where you want to be. And yes, the schedule is maybe part of it to a degree, but you look at some of these road games that they faced and, at Philadelphia, at Phoenix, at Golden State, a couple against Boston, Miami. I mean, it's not like the strength of schedule there has changed dramatically either. They've just really picked up their play. I think it's it probably speaks to a consistency and maybe being a little bit more mentally tough. All the reasons that I was given earlier. Tyrese Halliburton's play has been huge, and we haven't talked to Andrew Nembhard here, but I think he's had a lot to do with this as well. The road turnaround has come right about the same point that Andrew Nembhard came back, and the Pacers are 14-8 this year when they've had Nembhard, and they're 5-10 without him. So I tend to think it's maybe just a combination of water finding its level a little bit, getting Nembhard back, and then a realization that they're going to have to pick up this level of play or they're going to put themselves in a really, really difficult spot. And, fortunately for them, they have changed this pretty dramatically. And you look at the road record now, and it's not bad. It's just a couple games under 500. And the other thing is they played far more road games than home games here so far. So 22 on the road, 15 at home, which I think is important to note when diagnosing this team too. Those numbers are going to end up even at the end of the year. They're going to be 41-41. Right now, when you look at the record of the Pacers, it's with playing 7 fewer home games. That starts to change tonight. It starts to change Friday with a couple of home games. But nobody's played more road games than the Pacers here so far this year.
We know that everybody likes to focus on star power and where the top players on a roster are performing, but we knew they were going to, the Pacers, be in need of adding front court depth with all the injuries that happened to start the season. And when they go out second week of December and acquire Thomas Bryant, I wasn't just excited about it because he went to Indiana. I was excited about it because with the cap constraints they're operating with, to be able to get somebody that's going to be efficient in small number of shot attempts, but is going to be a physical presence and be a high energy guy, that's a great value find for any team, let alone one that was floundering for front court depth like the Pacers were. How do you quantify what his addition has been, not just to stabilize the front court, but with the overall roster construction of this team?
Yeah, well, the word energy that you just brought there is what stands out. And I think the nice thing about where the Pacers are is they don't have a ton of front court depth, and injuries are going to be, hopefully staying healthy in that area is going to be really key because the Pacers don't have a ton of depth there. But as long as they've got their guys healthy, of course, Miles Turner and Thomas Bryant. The nice thing about Bryant is he fits, to me, really well into the whole of what they needed filled, which is they don't need somebody to come in and play 20 minutes at the backup center position. Turner can get you 30, low 30s, and then they're willing to run some minutes out there with a small ball group where Siakam plays some 5 or Toppin plays some 5. So the Pacers don't need a center on the court for 48 minutes. They probably need a center on the court for at least what they've been doing, something like 38 or 40 minutes. And so they're not asking too much of Thomas Bryant. If Thomas Bryant had to come in and play 25, 30 minutes, I certainly think he could be serviceable in that situation. And odds are we may see it at some point. Does Miles Turner play in every game the rest of the year? I sure hope so, but odds are probably against that. And in fact, as you guys were talking about coming into this, he's on the injury report tonight with an illness. And I do think Bryant can fill that role if necessary, but what they're asking him to do right now is play about 10 minutes per game and put all of your energy into that 10 minutes and to put 25 or 30 minutes worth of energy into 10 minutes. So you get a guy that comes out and I think has brought a change of pace in that regard, not necessarily to the quickness of the game, but just in terms of being able to inject a lot of energy at the center position. And I think he fits really well. Moses Brown was here for a couple of weeks, who's a big, tall, lanky guy and a pretty good rim protector. But I think Bryant's more like Miles Turner in that he helps spread the floor. You're not guarding Moses Brown outside of 10 feet. He's just not any.
You're not guarding him outside of 5 feet.
Maybe even 3 feet.
He's very effective within that 3 to 5 feet, but you get him outside of that, and it goes away a little bit.
No question. And Bryant has knocked down about a 3 a game since he's been a Pacer. So I think the fit there is a lot better too.
Pat, who do you deem to be the gold standard here is obvious, okay? And that is Red Panda is the gold standard. Who are the underrated halftime shows? They've been mixing it up a little bit here, and I've seen some decent halftime shows lately. I sit near you during the halftime show and just watch it. Who is your creme de la creme here outside of Red Panda?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. The jump roping team is underrated, I feel, and they were just here. I'm going to have a little bit of recency bias as I do this, so I'm more than welcome to suggestions here because sometimes I forget about.
How about the lady that treats the medicine, the big exercise ball like a gerbil wheel and just like runs back and forth on the whole? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They just had her the other night.
One.
Is it wrong that I'm kind of deep down cheering for a face plant?
Is it wrong? I don't know.
I'm not the only one. Cheering is maybe the wrong word, right?
I occasionally root for the chairs when that guy's stacking the
yeah,
chairs.
Slottick, right?
Yeah.
That guy is fun, but you can tell he loves himself some Slottick, which I'm down with that.
You can appreciate that of all people.
Yeah, I mean he's a fan of himself for certain, right? And I'm a little uncomfortable with the leotard that he wears, but other than that, it's pretty impressive, right, Pat? He just stacks chairs and hangs on them.
You know what? When that guy's out there, I just kind of look down and I focus on what we're talking about at halftime
because of the discomfort of him falling or the leotard.
All of the above. No. Look.
Okay.
I know he's done that a million times, and I'm sure it's incredibly safe because he does it over and over and over and over again. I imagine the worst happening.
It's that millionth and first time, Pat. It's the millionth and first time where it really,
That's
it's
right. Well, my thing is this.
There's a big difference between falling off that hamster ball wheel and having an embarrassing moment and falling where that guy is.
No question. I've always wondered this. Can we agree on this, okay? Can we agree that 86% of all halftime shows, the first time they were tried, alcohol was a factor? Is that fair?
Yes.
Because how else would you know? Like, you know what? I have the ability to balance a Schwinn 10-speed bicycle on my chin while a cat's riding it. How else would you know that unless you're drunk, right?
I think you're in the neighborhood, except the only potential fault there is how are you supposed to balance a Schwinn 10-speed bike sober, let alone drunk? And I
Fair.
guess if you can do it under the influence,
right,
then maybe that's all the proof
you can't ride the bike, so you might as well bounce it on your chin, right? Do you think Tom Brady or John Travolta have an advantage in that skill because of the little divot on their chin?
I think Tom Brady has an advantage in that skill because of hand-eye coordination. I actually had a conversation once with Malcolm Brogdon. We were playing a game of Jenga, Mark Boyle and I, in our preseason show on Media Day. And we got talking about games like Jenga and being an athlete on how much that actually helps. And at least Brogdon felt like, the hand-eye coordination type of thing served him extremely well in all sorts of games like that. So the divot doesn't hurt, but I think the hand-eye coordination helps more.
Listen, Pat, kidding aside, and I know that you and I are both very fortunate to be able to see the game from a perspective standpoint, that's a privilege and is unique. The hand-eye coordination that goes into the NBA with the pace in which the basketball moves around, not even on rebounding. I'm talking about the ball movement, the anticipation of what lanes are open, and the ball reversal. The pace in which the ball moves, the hand-eye coordination for that alone there's a reason why they are the upper 1% of athletes.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, if you've ever had the opportunity to sit anywhere near the floor, you've experienced that. If you haven't, I always say come out to a Mad Ants game because while that's not the NBA, it's the next closest level, and you can, at an affordable price, see exactly what you're talking about. And this isn't the direction you're heading with this, but it's one thing I always keep in the back of my mind, especially when you're watching a game on TV and an official misses a call here or there. I mean, the speed of the game at the NBA level, on the floor level, is insane. And it's an impossible task for officials to get all those calls right because everything happens so quickly. I'm always amazed, frankly, in general, how many they get right.
Yeah, I mean, you are correct because you watch the replay and you're like, holy cow, and the fact that you forget that certain officials, they only have one area of the floor that they are in charge of. So something happens, you're like, how did that guy miss that? And it's like, well, because it was the other person's responsibility because they see different areas. I mean, listen, I do enough with officials to know that it's a thankless job and one that those guys, we also forget the officials at the NBA level, whether people want to admit it or not, top 1% of what they do as well. Pat Boylan going to be on the radio tonight. Pacers and Bulls at the Fieldhouse. Things getting underway. 7 o'clock pregame show. What time, Eddie?
6:30.
6:30 right here on this radio station. Pat, appreciate it. We'll see you tonight, all right?
Likewise, gentlemen, appreciate it.
All right, Pat Boylan joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Jeff Rabjohn's going to make his debut for 25. Talk a little college basketball next. And we have birthday candles to light, ignite,
It's not my birthday.
and I guess blow out. I know it's not.
It's not yours either.
But it's a landmark one of 90 years for somebody of great significance to this fair city. I'll tell you who, and Jeff Rabjohns will join us next. This is exactly how it sounded on June 26th of 1977. That is the audio from the what would turn out to be the final ever public concert for Elvis Presley. Everyone, of course, knows that was at Market Square Arena here in Indianapolis. He had stayed at the Stauffer Restaurant and Inn at 2820 North Meridian, which is now a culinary center, I think affiliated with Ivy Tech. But he, after the concert, Elvis was scheduled for his next concert in Milwaukee, did not feel well, returned to Graceland, and then, of course, would pass away before doing another concert. That is why there is the marker, as most people know, on Market Street in the old location of Market Square Arena, sitting right there at the corner of Market and Alabama's, where you will see that marker designating it for the spot of Elvis's last concert. But Elvis Presley, today is the 90th birthday of Elvis Aaron Presley. So it is hard to believe because you obviously think of him as forever being there in his mid-40s. But Elvis Presley, if he were alive, would be blowing out 90 birthday candles today. Jimmy, were you ever a big Elvis guy?
Yeah.
Really?
Like Elvis, Hound Dog's always a classic. Jailhouse Rock. I mean, most of his, more mainstream stuff. But yeah, I like
What's
Elvis.
your favorite Elvis song? Is it one of those two?
Yeah, Hound Dog.
Eddie,
I remember
yourself?
listening
Hound
to that
Dog.
with my mom and dad.
I agree with Jimmy. Hound Dog.
That's a rarity. That's a rarity that we
My grandma
line up.
loves Elvis. Loves Elvis.
One of my earliest memories, because that's not unusual, right? That we lived in Shelbyville at the time, and I remember this like it was yesterday. We were sitting at a stoplight on Highway 9, and the woman in the car in front of my mom's car got out of the car and walked up to my mom's window and said, "He's dead. He's dead." And I mean, I was a little kid, right? And I'm like, what in the world? I felt like there had been a car accident or somebody hit I'm like, what is going on? And I mean, she was in hysterics. And she had just heard the news that Elvis Presley had passed away in 1977. But there you go. Happy birthday to Elvis, 90 of them. To celebrate, Indiana will be taking on USC in a highly contested historical Big Ten matchup at, of course, Assembly Hall. The Hoosiers coming into the game. Jimmy, I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about USC from a basketball standpoint, but I think we're starting to learn more about Indiana. Is that fair to say it that way?
Yeah, but it's all with the caveat of, is the changes in their particular three-point performances indicative of not being able to play two bigs because of Malik Renew's injury, or is this a real philosophical shift in how the Hoosiers want to operate? Whenever Renew returns, and Don Fisher had indicated, last week or earlier this week, rather, when we talked to him, that it might be quite some time. When he returns, is this the same offensive prowess that we see, or do they go back to what they had?
Well, joining us to talk about exactly that, he needs no introduction when it comes to talking about Indiana basketball, but I will give him one anyway. Jeff Rabjohns is, of course, the kind of the heart and soul of the coverage day-to-day with Indiana basketball, Peegs.com, where you can read his work. You can obviously always find him on the X Twitter post, whatever you'd like to call it. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Jeff, I'll begin with this. Malik Renew is a very, very good basketball player, and he's been probably the most consistent Hoosier. But without him out there, it does seem like it's opened up Indiana's offense and spread it out a little bit. Are we going to see Indiana sticking to more of like the lone low block player and maybe an alternation between he and Ballard when they come back, or am I making way too much of that?
No, I think that is the key question for Indiana right now, based upon what they've demonstrated by playing one big, which I know there were a number of people who really, really, really encouraged Mike Woodson early in the year. Hey, you have some more shooters now than you had in the last couple of years. You really should get them on the floor more and go with one big and rotate them. Maybe play two bigs here and there, sort of an off-speed pitch to try to throw teams off balance maybe for 2, 3, 4 minutes. But whether or not they stick with this is the question. But they're certainly better. Their offense is better. Their numbers are better. They're finally taking threes at a higher volume, at a volume that the metrics say you need to take threes at to have an efficient offense. They've taken 50 3-pointers in the last 2 games. That's their most 3-pointers attempted in any 2-game stretch outside of, they went 8 for 35 against Nebraska because that was such a chase game. But in any of the regular 2 games, this is the most they've taken. And they went 12 for 27, 9 for 23. So they're sitting there at 42% from 3 over the last 2 games. And we've all heard fans over the last couple of years, IU can't make threes. IU can't make threes. Yes, they can. They need to start taking enough to give their shooters a chance to get into rhythm. That was the issue. They are. It's working. 12 for 27 is great. 9 for 23 is very, very good. The metrics say you need to be around 25 3-point attempts per game to have a highly efficient offense. So it's a really positive thing, but what exactly Mike Woodson's going to decide when Malik is healthy, we'll see. He really, really likes playing 2 bigs. I think it's going to depend upon 2 things. Where are they in the season? Is this only a couple more weeks down the road, or is it 4 to 5? And are they winning or losing? And I think that's going to kind of make the decision. I think those are going to be the big factors.
Jeff, we know that
ways and make a decision.
Jeff Rabjohn's our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. We know that Mackenzie Mbako is a guy that can score. He's a rhythm scorer like you're talking about, Jeff, right? Is it a matter of Mackenzie Mbako going out in a game and asserting himself early, or is it more about the game asserting itself towards Mackenzie Mbako and allowing things to open up, which we may now see with that, what we're talking about in terms of their ball distribution, if that makes sense what I'm saying?
Sure. I think that the biggest thing is with playing 1 big, he essentially is more of a 4 than a 3, and the 4 is far more his natural position. He's better when he's moving to spots to get shots rather than having to dribble too much out in the open court, which he's not great at, having to bring the ball up the court, which he's definitely not great at. He has some fantastic skills. His shooting motion is outstanding. I remember sitting with some NBA people even before he got to college, and they were like, man, have you watched this kid just shoot the ball? I'm like, yeah, it's really good. So when you get Mackenzie Mbako in positions where he knows, okay, if the ball comes here to me, I'm going to shoot it. His feet are calmer. There's less movement. And obviously with any shooter, the less movement in your body, the less movement in your hands going left, right, whatever. The calmer the body, the calmer the hands, the smoother the shot, better chance it goes in. So with playing 1 big, you're getting Mackenzie to certain spots. I mean, we saw the 3s he hit coming out of the second half at the Palestra against Penn State. Pretty much, spot-up type shots. Now, he can hit those tough 2s, those baseline shots and those kind of things. But you don't want him out there dribbling around like a small forward, trying to go left and right, cut, and all that kind of stuff. You want straight line drives, and you want shots that take 1-2 dribbles, if that, to set up. So I think that's what's really helped his shooting, because he does have a good shot. He just needs to get to the proper spots, and playing the 4 as opposed to the 3 helps him do that.
Jeff Rabjohns of Peegs.com is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Jeff, you mentioned Indiana's 77-71 win over Penn State over the weekend. I kept having to stop myself during that game because I was worried about the other shoe dropping and Penn State being able to knock down a couple shots from beyond the arc to pull away in that game. That doesn't happen. Penn State, in fact, is held to just 14% from beyond the arc. When you looked back at that matchup, especially down the stretch, how much of that was just a cold stretch of shooting by Penn State, and how much of that was Indiana continuing to evolve as a perimeter defensive unit?
I mean, we got to be honest. I mean, Penn State just donked off some good looks. They really did. I mean, they should not go 3 for 21 from 3. I thought Indiana did a good job of challenging some shots, of not allowing Ace Baldwin to just easily get to all those spots. But Penn State just missed some shots. They missed some shots at the rim. Ace Baldwin missed some shots he normally makes. Give Indiana credit for the effort, because I thought Indiana's effort throughout the Penn State game was very good. I thought for maybe the first time all year, Indiana had very, very close to 40 minutes of consistent effort. But Penn State going 3 for 21, there were some that Penn State just missed. And, you got to be honest about that.
Is there an area of USC tonight, when you look metrically for them, they don't take a ton of threes. They're not very efficient in that regard either. They don't generate a ton of second chance points, and offensive rebounding is a struggle for them as well. On paper, it appears to be a matchup that Indiana should be able to exploit and, I don't want to jinx it necessarily, but win comfortably. When you look at USC, up against Indiana, where could they exploit things if you're the Trojans?
You're talking about
for USC being as limited as they are in a lot of key categories, especially 3-point attempts and second chance opportunities. Is there a game plan for them to be able to set a tone against Indiana tonight?
Oh, I mean, in theory, yeah, you're right. USC's they're not very good. They're just not. I don't know exactly. I don't know if this whole Musselman at USC thing's going to work out long term or not. It might the short term if he has like some great portal haul, but I'm kind of skeptical on this whole thing for a number of reasons. But anyway, to answer your question, and for me to stop rambling, I think the thing is, USC really likes what Musselman leans on is a lot of weak side action. You try to keep defenders off the ball. You try to, occupy people opposite so you can do things on the ball side to be able to get shots. They do have a lot of screening. Where they set screens is good. How they set screens is not so good right now. Their general concepts of Musselman's movement is good. There are some kind of sort of tinges of motion offense that like people who love that from back in the day might look at it and say, oh, look, off the ball, they're setting these screens, So those are the kind of things that USC does well when USC is playing well. And USC has played well in stretches. Even games they've lost by double figures, so there have been times that they've had leads. They've played well sometimes for 22, 25 minutes. They just haven't played well for – I don't even know if they've played really, truly well for more than 30, 32 minutes in a game. But off-the-ball stuff, screening, the spacing, those are the movement in particular is when they're playing well, the movement's really good. So that's what USC is going to try to do to Indiana tonight.
By the way, just so you know, Jimmy, a lot of times when you use the term the movement to Indiana fans, they get shudders, right? They get PTSD. But in this case, we're talking about offensive movement. Now, Jeff Rabjohns joins us. Jeff, Miles Rice, to me, when he's good, is really good. I really like his ability to floor space, facilitate. Does he need to be more consistent in terms of being the point person who is running their offense?
Well, I think Indiana needs to be more consistent in only having one big on the floor and having space in the paint when they set a ball screen for Miles Rice. You look at the way he was used against Washington State, and Trevor Andershock put great video of that up when Indiana got his commitment. When he was out on the West Coast on the way to being Pac-12 Freshman of the Year, when ball screens were set for him, he was able to turn the corner and there's space in the paint. Early on, Indiana would set a ball screen. He turned the corner, and there's Malik Renaud and Malik's defender, and there's Umar Bowell and Umar's defender. Where exactly is a point guard supposed to go when he turns the corner and there's four dudes, all 6'9" or taller, there in the paint? There's no space. So one of the things that's really changed for Miles Rice is there's now space to operate. Space is a shooter's best friend. Space is a scorer's best friend. Space is absolutely the best friend of a guy who plays at speed with the ball in his hands. You can be as fast as anybody with the ball in your hands, but if you turn the corner and there's a whole bunch of bodies there, you got no place to go. So I think the biggest thing that's happened is there's now space for Miles to operate, and that is added to his comfort level, which in turn has helped his confidence.
Lastly, Jeff, tell me what you're working on at Peegs, just in terms of, obviously I know you'll be covering this game, but stories that you might have around the corner or things that you've kind of had an eye on that's going to be out there for people to be able to take in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, Indiana's got a 6'6" Bosnian wing on campus tonight for this game. His agent sent Pigs.com some extended film, so I've gone through that. So we're going to have a longer look at the 6'6" Bosnian prospect that they have. Also taking a look at how Indiana has played to date and kind of what's coming up next because, right now Indiana's got a nice record, but they've got one quad one win, and that was the Penn State win at the Palestra. After the USC game, they have a string of right now what looks like it's either going to be 10 or 11 quad one games in a row. So, all these quad 3, quad 4 games, the UNC Greensboro, Sam Houston State, Winthrop, whoever these people are, all that's done. Okay. No offense to those folks. They need to go on the road, play the Indianas of the world, get the paycheck, pay their bills. I get it. It's fine. but it doesn't tell the story of a team. And when you all of a sudden go from, okay, Indiana's 10 of Indiana's wins are quad 3 and quad 4 opponents. Okay. So there's a lot of puffery in this record right now. Now, that doesn't mean Indiana can't be good, but what it does mean is quad 3 and quad 4 wins for a program like Indiana with the resource of Indiana, that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So, here in about, 8, 9, 10 hours, gentlemen, the kiddie games are going to be over, okay? It's going to be big boy ball for about 5, 6 straight weeks for Indiana. So we're kind of working on the story of, like, who they've played, what those teams have showed, who they're about to play, and what those teams have shown so far. And share 2 different pictures there, my friend. 2 very different pictures.
Quad 1s and quad 2s. Now we're talking my language.
There you go. The 6'6" Bosnian, by the way, is not Ivan Renko, just in case anybody is curious.
It's a real guy.
That's right. That's right. Jeff, we appreciate it, man. Appreciate the time as always. All right, we'll be looking for the coverage of the IU-USC game.
Appreciate you. Always good talking to you guys. Take care.
All right, Jeff Rabjohn's joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Jimmy, you got some plays of the day?
I do.
Maybe that's involved? All right, we'll get to that next.
Today's plays of the day. We'll start first with a collegiate pick. Big East showdown. UConn on the road at Villanova. I'll take the Huskies to win the money line against the Wildcats. Pacers, Bulls tonight lay the 6 on Indiana as they host Chicago. In that same game, I'll take over 30.5 total points plus assist for Tyrese Halliburton. Last one for you. It's a showdown of the Eastern and Western Conference's two best teams in the NBA as the Cavaliers host the Thunder. Give me the Cavs to an outright over OKC. Eddie, any place for you?
No, I want to applaud Jake for his athletic prowess over there. Nice job with catching in the headphones.
Thank you. Hand-eye coordination, Eddie. It's what we talked about earlier.
Eye hand.
Those are your plays of the day.
JMV just walked in and is wearing one of the coolest sweatshirts of all time.
Like this, do you?
I think
Did you get it for
told you,
Christmas?
though, there's a subliminal meaning. Did you get it for Christmas?
Christopher Litzy. Chris Litzy, the amazing Litzy, got it for me for my birthday back in December.
You know, there's I think I told you the story once I wore – John, for those that can't see it, is wearing a sweatshirt with Bucko Bruce of the Creamsicle Buccaneers. There's apparently like a subtle kind of a Fight Club type meaning to that sweatshirt if you wear it.
Is there really?
In certain parts,
Cool.
yeah.
That's what I need.
I had a lot of guys come up and compliment me once in the airport somewhere, and they're like, so how long have you been a fan of Bucko Bruce? I'm like, one guy actually said, how long have you been a fan of Bucko Bruce? And I said, since I was probably like 6. I was like, really? That
what
young?
Do you know? What do you know this team as? What do you?
Doug Williams is who I think of.
Doug Williams?
Leroy Selman or Hugh Green would be a lot of
I would
Ricky
say
Bell?
the same thing. How about Gary Anderson?
Yeah, well, he's about every team you can say that
I love
with.
Gary Anderson's Jerry Curl was so awesome.
I think they went to the Bucks did in '79 the NFC Championship game, and I think they lost to the Rams 9-0 if I'm not mistaken. I remember that too.
John McKay, man.
John McKay, of course, he's the one that had the famous quote, right? What do you think of the execution of your team? I think it's a good idea. Those teams were terrible for the most part, but
what was it,
those uniforms were
76?
awesome.
And they were absolutely
winless,
doormats.
right? Yeah.
They
That
would
is
be
an
very
awesome
proud of an
sweatshirt.
8-9 season. Would they back then when John McKay would have given a big locker room speech about how great an 8-9 season was?
We
and
played
how
that
proud.
earlier. I don't know if you heard it, but I was surprised that was on the Colts website. Jim Irsay talking to the team after the game.
Was it really on the website?
Yeah.
Good Lord Almighty. That's where we are, though. I tried to tell everybody that is the identity, and until they see the issue and that reflection in the mirror, then this is what you're going to get. That didn't used to be acceptable, but
Correct.
now evidently it's acceptable.
What's
So
on the
it's
big
too bad.
show, John?
I'm sure we'll talk about that. Talk about the Pacers Bulls later on tonight. So Miles is puking. Is that true?
He has the
gets
same
some-
bug
he
as
gets
Chris
some
Ballard,
bad-
apparently.
One time, Vince Neil came up on stage by himself at Legends Bar and Grill in Bloomington and said he got a hold of some bad steak and shake. But really, he was fat, bloated, on drugs, and didn't want to perform and was too lazy to roll it out there. And he called everybody in Bloomington. He said, "You blankers are not a Hollywood type of crowd." And then somebody said, "Yeah, that's because this is Bloomington, Indiana, down here by Bloomington South High School, you idiot." So
You know,
he was in a fog.
The Steak
Vince
and
Neil.
Shake in Bloomington, John, true story, when I was in college, was you remember Division I athletes have what's called training table,
Sure.
right? So they get so many meals as part of their scholarship and whatever else. The training table for the Indiana basketball program in Bob Knight's era was a line of credit at Steak and Shake on Walnut. That was their
Well, that's
that
when
was,
Steak and Shake was good. Now it's like, all right, you can order your food, but stay as far away from us as you possibly can, okay?
That's right. And I don't know if
You stand at this window and then ask a robot to make your food down the assembly line, and here it is.
Come back in 20 minutes.
That's what they all are. I wouldn't go to I mean, McDonald's is the same way. Hey, order out here. There's no personal contact
that's right.
here.
Man, Steak and Shake back in the day was so good,
It
though,
was
it
good.
not?
We used
Oh,
to
man.
come up here and go to that. With
Double steak
that's
burger with
why.
cheese, ketchup, tomato, mustard. Man, it was the
Steak and
absolute
Shake in
best.
Bloomington was
Ayo,
the big
wow,
wheel
Jake.
before it was Steak
Yeah,
and
the
Shake.
big
and the
wheel's
big wheel was
prominently
awesome.
mentioned in Season on the Brink. What's that?
You got mayo on yours? Wow, that's
No, I
impressive.
said ketchup, tomato, mustard.
I heard mayo.
No.
Did you hear mayo, Jimmy? I heard mayo.
I thought I heard mayo, but now that he said tomato again, I think I just heard
Tomato.
it all
You
together.
think
in
it's-
one
I was
piece.
just
Hey,
trying
think
to
you've ever
be
eaten
optimistic.
mayonnaise and you didn't know it?
No, I would
I
know.
bet you have.
No. That's kind of like saying, like,
Have you ever had some kind of salad that somebody's made?
it's kind of like
a
saying, have you
potato
ever had a
salad?
colonoscopy with a curling iron and not known it?
You
No,
ever had
that's never
you
happened.
you ever had a potato salad or anything like that? Because you know
No.
there's mayo dumped in that.
No. Nope.
There's a mayo
No
dumped
chicken
in a lot of
salad,
things.
no.
I'm sure.
Salad to me
I
means.
bet if I asked Shannon, she would not agree with this. Hey,
Ask
is
her.
everything going okay with Shannon, by the way, too?
Yeah, Shannon had slipped on the
No.
ice.
My girl.
Wearing a knee
we can't
brace
have
now.
that.
How did you know about that?
Huh? What do you think happens after you and I talk every night?
Dun, dun, dun.
Every night when I talk to John, he's like, listen, I got to go.
I gotta go hoop.
I got a call coming in.
I gotta go play a little hoop here. I'll see ya.
That's right. John's up next. We'll be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.